My name is Whitney, and I am 33 years old. After my husband's affair wiped out my entire life savings, his mistress's billionaire husband showed up at my front door. He handed me a thick legal folder and said, "I own a $450 million commercial real estate empire. Say yes to my plan, and tomorrow we sign the papers at the courthouse to destroy them both." I just smiled and took the pen. Before I share exactly how we dismantled their lives piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you love seeing a trader get exactly what they deserve. I was sitting in the sterile lobby of the First National Bank branch on a Tuesday morning. The air conditioning was humming loudly above me, sending a chill over my skin, but I was sweating. I tapped my foot against the tiled floor, staring at the clock on the wall. It was 10 in the morning. I was scheduled to meet a commercial landlord at 2 in the afternoon to sign the lease for my very first flagship restaurant. For 7 years, I had worked as an executive chef in some of the most demanding and high-pressure kitchens in the city. I worked double shifts. I spent my holidays sweating over hot stoves smelling like roasted garlic and industrial exhaust catering to the wealthy elite of our city. Every single burn mark on my forearms, every missed weekend with friends, and every exhausted tear I shed in the walk-in freezer was for this exact day. I had meticulously saved $180,000. It was my seed money. It was my freedom. Nancy, the bank manager I had scheduled my appointment with, walked out of her glass-walled office. She was a kind older woman who had helped me set up my business accounts years ago. But today she was not smiling. She held a single piece of printed paper in her hand, and her face was pale. She gestured for me to come into her office and close the door tightly behind us. I felt my stomach drop. As someone who ran massive kitchens, I knew exactly what bad news looked like before it was spoken aloud. I sat down in the leather chair, clutching the portfolio that held my restaurant business plan. "Whitney," Nancy started, her voice unnaturally quiet. "I am looking at your primary business savings account, the one designated for the commercial lease deposit. Did you authorize a massive withdrawal this morning?" I stared at her, completely confused. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "I am here to request the cashier's check for the landlord. The funds should be sitting right there. It should be exactly $180,000. Nancy pushed the piece of paper across the polished wood desk. It was a printed statement of my account. My eyes immediately dropped to the bottom line. The balance was zero, a bold and glaring zero. I literally stopped breathing. The room seemed to tilt sideways. The humming of the air conditioner faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I picked up the paper, my hands shaking so violently that the page rattled. "This is a mistake," I said, my voice rising in panic. "This has to be a bank error. I have not touched this money. I have not made a single transfer. Nancy, please tell me this is a computer glitch." Nancy looked at me with deep sympathy and gently touched my hand. "It is not a glitch, Whitney. The entire balance was transferred out via an authorized wire at 8 this morning." "Authorized by who?" I demanded, my chest tightening with a suffocating panic. "Who could possibly authorize a wire transfer of my entire life savings?" "It was your husband," she said softly. "Jason authorized the transfer. Since he is listed as a secondary signer on your marital business accounts, he had the legal clearance to initiate the wire. The funds were moved to an external limited liability company." The words hit me like physical blows. Jason, my husband of 5 years. The charismatic and polished wealth manager who always wore tailored suits and looked down on my culinary career. He had always called my dream of owning a restaurant a cute little kitchen hobby. He had always insisted that he was the financial genius of the family, the one who understood how real wealth worked. But he had never interfered with my savings. He knew how hard I worked for that money. He knew that signing the lease today was the culmination of my entire adult life. Why would he do this? I whispered to myself, staring blindly at the zero on the page. Nancy offered to call the fraud department, but she gently reminded me that because his name was on the account, the bank could not automatically reverse it without his consent or a court order. Legally, he had the right to move the money. Morally, he had just gutted me. I stumbled out of this bank a few minutes later, completely blind to the world around me. The bright morning sunlight felt harsh and mocking. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, trying to fight off a full-blown panic attack. 7 years of brutal and back-breaking labor had been wiped out in a single click of a button while I was pouring my morning coffee. I reached my car and slammed the door shut, locking myself inside the silent vehicle. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and dialed Jason's private cell phone number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then went straight to his personalized voicemail. The smooth and confident tone of his voice on the recording made my blood boil. I ended the call and dialed again, sent to voicemail. I dialed his office line. His administrative assistant answered on the second ring, her tone bright and professional. I demanded to speak to Jason immediately. She hesitated, her voice dropping a fraction. I am so sorry, Whitney, but Jason is completely unavailable. He told me he was stepping into a highly confidential meeting with some major real estate investors and specifically asked not to be disturbed under any circumstances. I hung up the phone and threw it onto the passenger seat. The betrayal was a heavy and suffocating weight pressing down on my lungs. He was avoiding me. He knew exactly what time my bank appointment was, and he had deliberately timed the theft so he could hide behind his corporate walls while I discovered the wreckage of my dreams. He took everything. Every early morning, every burned hand, every single sacrifice I made for our future, he just swept it away. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The initial shock and panic were slowly burning away, replaced by a hot and radiating fury. He thought I was just going to sit in my car and cry. He thought because he wore the expensive suits and worked in a glass tower, he could steal my life's work, and I would just submit to his financial authority. He was wrong. I started the engine and threw the car into drive. I was not going to leave a voicemail. I was going to his office. The drive downtown took exactly 22 minutes. I did not stop for yellow lights. I barely registered the pedestrians or the blaring horns around me. My vision was tunneled entirely on the towering glass skyscraper that housed Jason's boutique wealth management firm. I threw my keys at the valet with a shaking hand and marched through the revolving glass doors. The lobby was a massive temple of white marble and polished steel, designed to intimidate, but I was running on pure adrenaline. I stepped into the elevator and slammed my finger against the button for the 42nd floor. When the heavy steel doors slid open, I bypassed the plush waiting area completely. Jason's administrative assistant stood up from her desk, her eyes widening in alarm. She reached out a hand, stammering my name, telling me he was with highly important clients and could not be disturbed. I did not even break my stride. I ignored her warnings and walked straight down the hallway toward the frosted glass walls of Jason's corner conference room. I did not knock. I grabbed the heavy chrome handle and shoved the door open. Jason was sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table. 2 older men in expensive tailored suits sat across from him, reviewing glossy investment portfolios. The sudden intrusion made both clients jump, turning around in their leather chairs with shocked expressions. Jason did not flinch. He did not look panicked or guilty. He simply looked up, his face an impenetrable mask of corporate perfection. He offered the clients a smooth and practiced smile that I had seen 1,000 times at his pretentious country club dinners. "Please excuse the interruption, gentlemen," Jason said, his voice dripping with relaxed charm. "My wife clearly has an emergency at home. Let us take a brief recess. My assistant will show you to the executive lounge for some coffee." The men murmured polite agreements, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, and shuffled out of the room. The assistant quickly ushered them away, casting a terrified glance at me before pulling the heavy glass door shut. The click of the latch echoed in the sudden silence of the room. We were completely alone. I stood near the door, my chest heaving, staring at the man I had shared a bed with for 5 years. He calmly stacked the portfolios on the table, aligned the edges perfectly, and then leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He looked at me not with the guilt of a thief, but with the mild annoyance of a parent dealing with a toddler throwing a tantrum. "You are acting completely hysterical, Whitney," he said, his voice flat and patronizing. "Crashing a closed-door meeting with a pair of 8-figure investors is a terrible look. What is so urgent that you had to humiliate me at work? I marched up to the mahogany table and slammed my hands down on the polished wood. Where is my money, Jason? I demanded, my voice shaking with a rage so intense it felt physical. I just came from the bank. $180,000. My lease money. You wired it out of my account this morning. Jason sighed, a long and theatrical sound designed to make me feel small. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with infuriating slowness. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city skyline before turning back to face me. I did not steal your money, Whitney, he said, speaking slowly as if English were my second language. I moved capital. I reinvested it. I am a wealth manager. It is literally what I do for a living. I saw an opportunity to secure our financial future, and I took the initiative. You reinvested it, I repeated, the sheer absurdity of the lie catching in my throat. That was not joint capital. That was my business savings. That was the money for my restaurant. I am supposed to sign the commercial lease in 3 hours. Jason rolled his eyes and scoffed. A short and dismissive sound that cut deeper than any scream. A restaurant lease. Really? You are going to throw away a guaranteed 30% return on a high-yield commercial real estate venture so you can go play chef? Play chef. I felt the blood drain from my face. I have worked 80-hour weeks for 7 years to save that money. I bled for that money. And that is exactly the problem, Jason fired back, his calm facade slipping just enough to reveal the deep-seated contempt he held for me. Look at yourself, Whitney. You spend your life smelling like exhaust fans, roasted onions, and industrial bleach. You work in commercial kitchens with dropouts and pretend you are building some massive empire. You are running a kitchen hobby. I took your little bakery money and put it into a real business. I stared at him, completely paralyzed by the sheer narcissism radiating from his pores. He had always been slightly arrogant about his career, but this was a total mask-off moment. He genuinely believed that my labor, my dreams, and my money belonged to him by default, simply because he wore a suit and had a corner office. The disrespect was so profound it left me temporarily breathless. He was not just stealing my money. He was attempting to steal my reality. He wanted me to believe that I was too simple-minded to manage my own finances, and that his theft was actually an act of husbandly benevolence. You had no right, I whispered, the anger turning into a cold and hard knot in my chest. You had zero right to touch a single cent of that money without my explicit permission. I do not care what imaginary real estate venture you claim to have found. I want that wire reversed right now. Pick up the phone, Jason. Call your private banker. Get it back. Jason walked back to the table, leaning his hands on the wood directly across from me. His blue eyes, the ones I used to think were so kind, were completely dead. I am not calling anyone. The funds are already locked into the holding company. You do not understand how high finance works, and frankly, I am exhausted from constantly trying to explain the real world to you. You need to let me handle the real business. When the dividend returns start coming in next quarter, you will thank me for not letting you blow our capital on a doomed restaurant lease. Until then, go home, take a breath, and calm down. He turned away from me, reaching for his leather briefcase on the credenza. He was dismissing me. He had stolen my life savings, insulted my entire existence, and was now essentially telling me to go wait in the kitchen while the adults talked. A hot wave of clarity washed over me. The man standing in front of me was not my partner. He was a parasite. I am not going anywhere, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You are going to show me exactly where that money went. Show me the holding company name. Show me the prospectus. Show me the wire destination. If it is such a brilliant investment, show me the paperwork right now. Jason stiffened. His back was turned to me, but I saw the slight hesitation in his shoulders, a momentary break in his flawless armor. He reached hastily into his briefcase to pull out a different file, clearly intending to bluff his way through my demand. But he was moving too fast. As he yanked the heavy folder upward, his hand caught the edge of his leather wallet resting inside the compartment. The wallet tumbled out of the briefcase, hitting the edge of the credenza before falling to the carpeted floor. A few crumpled receipts and heavy cardstock business cards fluttered out, scattering across the floor between us. I looked down, my eyes catching on a stark white piece of premium receipt paper that had landed right by my shoe. Jason scrambled to pick it up, his previous calm completely shattering into visible panic, but I was faster. I bent down, snatched the paper from the carpet, and stepped back out of his reach. "Give me that!" Jason hissed, lunging forward with a sudden burst of aggression. His voice had completely lost its polished corporate edge, replaced by genuine panic. I stepped back quickly, keeping the heavy mahogany table between us. I held the crumpled paper up to the light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a purchase receipt from an exclusive downtown jeweler. The total amount, printed in bold black ink, was $40,000. My eyes scanned the item description rapidly. A platinum tennis necklace with flawless cut diamonds. I looked at the billing address. It was our house. He had used an account tied to our residential address to purchase $40,000 worth of jewelry. But the shipping address was what made the air leave my lungs completely. Shipped to Courtney. I knew that name. I knew the exact face that went with it. Courtney was a staple at the elite country club Jason had insisted we join 2 years ago to elevate his professional image. She was a self-proclaimed socialite who spent her days sipping martinis by the pool and pretending to be a hospitality entrepreneur. She had always looked at me with a thinly veiled smirk, the kind of dismissive glare reserved for the hired help. A platinum diamond necklace, Jason. I read the words aloud, my voice echoing in the stark silence of the conference room. Shipped directly to Courtney. Is this your high-yield real estate venture? Is this how you secure our financial future? Jason stopped reaching for the paper. He straightened his tie, the panic quickly morphing back into cold and calculating arrogance. You are invading my privacy, Whitney. That is a client gift. You do not understand the overhead required to maintain high-level relationships in my industry. A client gift. I laughed, a harsh and bitter sound that scraped my throat. You stole $180,000 of my money this morning, and you are trying to convince me that a $40,000 diamond necklace sent to a country club housewife is a routine business expense. He took a step toward me, his jaw clenching so tightly I could see the muscle ticking in his cheek. I am providing for this family. You need to stop asking questions about things above your pay grade and go home. I looked at the man I had married. The tailored suit, the perfectly styled hair, the expensive watch I had bought for his 30th birthday. He was entirely hollow inside. There was no real estate venture. There was no investment portfolio. He was draining my life savings to fund an affair with a woman who thought boiling water was a culinary achievement. I shoved the receipt deep into the pocket of my jeans. "I'm going home, Jason," I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. "But not to wait for you." I walked out of the conference room, ignoring the stares of his colleagues, and rode the elevator down in complete silence. By the time I reached my car, the hot fury had settled into a freezing and absolute resolve. I drove back to our house in the suburbs, my mind racing through logistics. I needed to pack a bag. I needed to hire a ruthless divorce attorney. I needed to find a way to legally freeze whatever assets he had not already hidden. I pulled into the driveway and unlocked the front door. The house was immaculate and completely silent, a suffocating monument to a fake marriage. I walked straight up the stairs to the master bedroom, pulled my largest suitcase from the closet, and began throwing clothes into it. I grabbed my passport, my birth certificate, and the few pieces of jewelry my grandmother had left me. I was not going to spend another night under the same roof as that parasite. I grabbed my laptop from the desk and opened it on the bed. I needed to book a hotel room for the week while I figured out my next legal move. I pulled my wallet from my purse and extracted our joint premium credit card. If he was going to spend my bakery money on diamonds, I was going to put a luxury hotel suite on his tab. I navigated to a booking website, selected a room downtown, and typed in the credit card numbers. I clicked submit. A red error message flashed across the screen. Transaction declined. Please contact your banking institution. I frowned, double-checking the numbers. I typed them in again. Declined. I pulled out a different joint credit card, one we use strictly for household emergencies. I entered the details and hit submit. Declined. A new wave of dread washed over me. I grabbed my phone and logged into our joint banking portal. The screen loaded, displaying a bright red banner across the top of my dashboard. Access denied. Account frozen. Please contact customer service. I dropped the phone onto the mattress. He had locked me out. Jason had not just stolen my business savings. He had systematically frozen every single joint credit card, checking account, and emergency fund we shared. He knew I was going to pack a bag the moment I walked out of his office. He knew I would try to leave. By freezing the accounts, he was cutting off my oxygen. He was trapping me in this house with no money, no resources, and no way to hire legal counsel. He wanted me completely dependent, forced to submit to his narrative just to survive. I sank onto the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the open suitcase. My hands gripped the mattress fabric. He had calculated every single move. He had planned my financial execution down to the minute. Suddenly, 3 sharp knocks echoed from the front door downstairs. My head snapped up. It had to be Jason. He had frozen the accounts and rushed home to corner me, to force me into compliance while I was terrified and broke. I felt the adrenaline flood back into my veins. I was not going to cower in the bedroom. I marched down the staircase, my fists clenched tightly at my sides, ready to tear him apart. I reached the foyer, grabbed the brass handle, and yanked the front door open. "Jason, if you think freezing my cards will make me stay, you are out of your mind," I snapped. But it was not Jason standing on my front porch. The man looking back at me was older, perhaps in his early 40s. He wore a dark charcoal suit that did not just look expensive, it looked bespoke, cut to fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and his expression was completely unreadable, a mask of quiet and terrifying authority. He radiated the kind of raw power that Jason only pretended to have. I blinked, thrown entirely off balance. "You are not Jason." "No, I am not," the man said. His voice was deep, steady, and devoid of any warmth. "My name is Harrison." I stared at him, my mind scrambling to place the name. Then it clicked. I had seen him at the country club galas, always standing quietly in the background while his wife held court. He was Courtney's husband. He was the commercial real estate tycoon worth nearly $500 million. Before I could ask what he was doing on my porch, Harrison lifted his right hand. He was holding a thick manila legal folder. "Your husband is sleeping with my wife," Harrison said, stating the fact with the clinical detachment of a surgeon delivering a diagnosis. "And worse than that, he is stealing your money to do it. May I come in?" I stepped aside, my hand gripping the brass door handle so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. Harrison walked past me into the foyer. He did not look around with the judgmental sneer typical of the country club set. His gaze was entirely analytical, mapping the dimensions of my living room like a general surveying a battlefield. He moved with a quiet and dangerous grace that immediately made the space feel incredibly small. I closed the front door, locking the deadbolt out of pure instinct. I turned to face him, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "You know about them?" I managed to say, my voice sounding incredibly fragile in the tense silence of my own house. He did not answer immediately. He walked over to the glass coffee table and dropped the thick manila folder onto its surface. The heavy thud echoed in the room. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his bespoke suit jacket and extracted a sleek black smartphone. "I know a great deal more than just who they are sleeping with," Harrison said, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute zero warmth. "I know exactly what they are saying behind closed doors. You need to hear this. It will burn away whatever lingering affection you might still harbor for the man you married." He tapped the screen. The audio quality was crystal clear, completely devoid of any background static. It was unmistakably Jason's voice, followed immediately by the high-pitched and musical laugh of Courtney. "She honestly thinks she is going to sign a commercial lease today," Jason said on the recording. His tone dripped with the exact same condescension he had used in the conference room an hour ago. "It is actually pathetic. She has been packing up her little kitchen knives like she is about to become the next major culinary superstar." Courtney laughed again, the sound grating against my nerves like shattered glass. "Let her bake her little breads, Jason. It keeps her busy smelling like yeast and industrial grease while you handle the actual adult finances." Besides, we really need that capital to get started. We have it, Jason replied smoothly. The wire clears this morning, 180,000 perfectly clean and legitimate dollars straight from her bakery savings into the new holding company. She will probably just cry and throw a plate or two when she finds out. I have already frozen her credit access, so she cannot even hire a lawyer to stop the transfer. Harrison tapped the screen, cutting off the audio. The silence that rushed back into my living room was suffocating. I stood rooted to the hardwood floor, nausea rolling through my stomach. Hearing Jason dismiss my entire life's work as a pathetic joke was devastating, but hearing him calmly outline his strategy to financially paralyze me was something else entirely. It was pure evil. He had reduced my 7 years of blood, sweat, and tears into a casual punchline for his mistress. I looked at Harrison. He was watching me intently, his dark eyes registering every flicker of pain and rage crossing my face. He did not offer empty sympathy. He did not offer a comforting pat on the shoulder. He treated me like a business partner, receiving a highly classified tactical briefing. I found out 90 days ago, Harrison stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. I do not tolerate blind spots in my life, Whitney. When Courtney started taking sudden midweek trips and aggressively changing her daily schedule, I did not confront her. I hired a specialized team of private investigators and forensic accountants. I operate a commercial real estate empire that spans 3 continents. Tracking the movements of a bored socialite and a mid-level wealth manager took my people less than 48 hours. I swallowed hard, forcing the rising nausea down. So you have known for 3 months. Why are you standing in my living room today? Why wait until he took my money? Because an affair is a personal nuisance, Harrison replied coldly. But corporate theft is a declaration of war. Up until a week ago, they were just sleeping together in expensive hotel rooms. But then my accountants flagged a massive anomaly in one of my subsidiary ledgers. Jason is not just sleeping with my wife. He is actively stealing from me to fund her ridiculous delusions of becoming a hospitality mogul. I shook my head, struggling to process the sheer scale of the betrayal. Jason is a wealth manager. He makes a fortune in commissions. Why would he need to steal from you? Harrison stepped closer to the coffee table, resting his hands flat against the thick legal folder. Jason wants to play in the big leagues. Courtney wants to be the CEO of a luxury restaurant and hotel group, a shiny new toy for her to show off to her friends. To build that kind of corporate infrastructure, they need tens of millions of dollars. Jason has been quietly siphoning funds from my commercial development accounts and routing them through a labyrinth of offshore shell companies located in the Cayman Islands and Delaware. Harrison paused, his gaze boring directly into my soul. But here's the problem with siphoning dirty money, Whitney. You cannot just use it to sign domestic commercial leases and hire legitimate contractors without triggering massive red flags with federal banking regulators. To open the gate and legitimize the initial holding company, they needed clean seed capital, money that had a spotless and highly documented origin. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. My breath hitched in my throat. My savings. Exactly, Harrison said, nodding once. Your $180,000. It is completely clean. It was built slowly over 7 years through taxed income and legitimate culinary consulting. Jason wired your savings into their primary holding company this morning to serve as the foundational seed capital. Once your clean money is sitting in the account, it establishes a veneer of legitimacy. It allows him to start funneling my stolen millions into the exact same account, blending the funds to wash them clean. I stared at the legal folder on the table, feeling the ground entirely vanish beneath my feet. Jason had not just stolen my dream to buy Courtney a diamond necklace. He had weaponized my life's work. He was using the money I bled for as the financial shield for a massive money laundering operation. He was dragging my name and my clean capital into a federal crime just to impress a woman who viewed me as the hired help. He is going to use my restaurant money to build her hospitality group. I whispered, the sheer audacity of the scheme making my vision blur. He is laundering your real estate fortune right under your nose. He thinks he is, Harrison corrected. his voice dropping to a dangerously low register. He thinks because I travel 6 months out of the year that I am completely blind to what happens in my own accounts. He thinks he is the smartest man in the room. But he made a fatal miscalculation. He severely underestimated me, and based on what my investigators found out about your flawless work ethic, he severely underestimated you. Harrison picked up the thick manila folder and held it out toward me. Inside this file is every single routing number, offshore account detail, and fraudulent corporate registration they have created over the past 90 days. I have enough evidence to bury them both. But I have a specific legal problem, and you are the only person on this planet who holds the exact key to solve it. I looked from the folder up to Harrison's unreadable face. The panic and grief that had been choking me all morning abruptly vanished, burned away by a sudden and violent clarity. I reached out and took the folder from his hand. "Tell me what you need." Harrison unbuttoned his suit jacket and took a seat on the leather sofa opposite me. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped securely together. He did not look like a broken man whose wife was cheating on him. He looked like a chief executive officer preparing for a hostile corporate takeover. 5 years ago, Harrison began his voice perfectly level. I made the single worst business decision of my entire life. I married Courtney. At the time, my commercial real estate holdings were valued at roughly $200 million. Today, my empire is worth $450 million. Before we married, my legal team drafted a prenuptial agreement. It was standard, but it had a fatal flaw. It included an infidelity clause, but the burden of proof required was incredibly archaic. And more importantly, it guaranteed her 50% of all assets acquired during the marriage, regardless of fault if we stayed together past the 4-year mark. I sat down slowly on the edge of the armchair, my grip tightening on the manila folder. "So if you divorce her right now because she is sleeping with Jason, she takes half your company." "Exactly," Harrison said. "If I walk into family court tomorrow and file for a standard divorce, Courtney walks away with $225 million. Jason knows this. He read the prenup. That is why he is so arrogant. He knows that even if I catch them in a hotel room together, they still win. Jason will take his cut, Courtney will play the victim, and they will use my money to fund their new life." I felt a sickening twist in my gut. Jason had orchestrated a masterclass in financial manipulation. He had frozen me out so I could not fight back, and he had secured a massive payday through his mistress. "Then why are you here?" I asked, looking directly into his cold eyes. "If they have you backed into a corner, what good does it do to show up at my house with a folder full of bank routing numbers?" Harrison offered a tight and razor-thin smile. It was the smile of a predator circling its prey. Because Jason read the family law clauses in the prenuptial agreement, but he clearly skimmed over the corporate liability sections. There is a specific stipulation buried on page 47. If either party is found to be actively engaging in corporate fraud, embezzlement, or federal financial crimes using marital assets, the entire prenuptial agreement is immediately rendered null and void. She forfeits everything, every single penny. I looked down at the folder in my lap. The money laundering, the fake hospitality group. "Precisely," Harrison said. "But right now the money they moved is sitting in a gray area. Jason transferred your clean bakery savings to establish the holding company. He is slowly trickling my real estate funds into that same account, labeling them as consulting fees and vendor advances. If I strike right now, Jason will hire a fleet of defense attorneys. He will claim the investments were legitimate business risks that simply failed. Courtney will play the naive housewife who had no idea what her financial advisor was doing. The authorities might freeze the accounts, but a skilled lawyer could drag the litigation out for a decade. I do not want them tied up in litigation. I want them ruined." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening as the strategy began to form in my mind. "You need concrete proof. You need to show that Courtney is not just a naive wife, but an active participant in the fraud. And you need to prove Jason is deliberately embezzling the funds, not just making bad investments." "I need a witness on the inside," Harrison corrected. "Jason is arrogant, but he is paranoid. He keeps the internal ledgers locked down on a private server. My forensic accountants can track the money leaving my accounts, but we cannot see exactly how they are allocating it within Courtney's fake hospitality group. We need someone inside their operation, someone who can access their vendor contracts, review the kitchen build-out budgets, and download the raw data from their private server before they can delete it. I stared at him, the sheer audacity of his plan washing over me. You want me to do it. You want me to infiltrate the company that my husband built with his mistress using my stolen life savings. Jason thinks he broke you this morning, Harrison stated, delivering the brutal truth without flinching. He froze your cards because he expects you to panic. He expects you to come crawling back to him begging for access to your checking account to buy groceries. He wants you submissive and dependent. If you play that role perfectly, he will let his guard down. But more importantly, Courtney has a massive problem and she does not even realize it yet. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of problem? She told her high society investors that her new restaurant is going to be the crown jewel of the city, Harrison explained. But Courtney does not know the first thing about the restaurant industry. She does not know how to source ingredients, how to design a profitable menu, or how to manage a commercial kitchen. She is desperate for an executive chef to design the flagship menu so the investors do not pull out before the money laundering scheme is complete. The pieces clicked together with a satisfying and metallic finality. They needed culinary expertise to make the front operation look legitimate. I had 7 years of executive chef experience. Harrison stood up, towering over the coffee table. He looked down at me, his expression hardening into absolute resolve. He was no longer just a betrayed husband. He was a billionaire offering a contract of mutually assured destruction. "Help me dismantle their shell companies from the inside," Harrison said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Tomorrow we sign a contract at the courthouse. I will fully fund your restaurant and we will destroy them." I looked at the folder in my hands. I thought about the burn marks on my forearms from years of working the fry stations. I thought about the smell of industrial bleach and the exhausting double shifts. I thought about Jason sitting in his glass tower mocking my dreams and handing my hard-earned money over to a woman who viewed me as nothing but a punchline. I did not feel panic anymore. I did not feel grief. I felt powerful. I looked up at Harrison and met his cold and calculating gaze with one of my own. "I agree," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. "Let us burn them to the ground." Harrison left my house shortly after we finalized the broad strokes of our strategy. He promised his legal team would have the partnership paperwork ready by 9 the next morning. When his sleek black town car pulled out of my driveway, the adrenaline that had been keeping me upright finally began to crash. My house, filled with the ghosts of a fake marriage, felt suffocating. I grabbed the suitcase I had packed earlier and loaded it into the trunk of my car. I could not stay there tonight. I needed a safe harbor. I needed my blood family. I drove across town to the affluent gated community where my mother Linda lived. My father had passed away a decade ago, leaving her a modest life insurance policy, but in recent years her lifestyle had mysteriously upgraded. She drove a pristine luxury SUV and took frequent trips to Europe. I always assumed she had made smart investments to secure her retirement. I pulled into her circular driveway, dragging my suitcase up the brick pathway to the front door. My heart felt heavy, a bruised and battered weight in my chest. I just wanted to be someone's daughter tonight. I did not bother knocking. I used my spare key and pushed the heavy oak door open. The house smelled incredibly rich, an intoxicating blend of white truffle oil, seared Wagyu beef, and expensive red wine. I followed the scent into the formal dining room, expecting to find them having a regular evening meal. My mother Linda and my younger sister Chelsea were sitting at the long glass dining table. They were wearing plush silk robes, laughing over towering containers of food from Le Petit Chateau, the most exclusive and notoriously expensive French restaurant in the city. A single dinner there easily cost $500. The table was littered with crystal wine glasses, silver platters, butter-poached lobster tails, and delicate pastries. I thought about the stale bagel I had eaten at dawn before heading to the bank, the sheer exhaustion radiating through my bones from months of double shifts, all while my family feasted in absolute luxury. Chelsea looked up, her laughter freezing when she saw my pale face. and the heavy suitcase dragging behind me on the polished wood. Whitney, my mother said, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. She sounded far more inconvenienced than concerned. What on earth are you doing here dragging luggage across my clean floors? We are having a quiet girls' night. You should have called ahead. I let go of the suitcase handle. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. I desperately needed my mother to stand up to wrap her arms around me to tell me everything was going to be all right. But she just stared at the wheels of my luggage, visibly annoyed that I might be scratching the finish. As I stepped closer to the table, my eyes caught sight of a thick black receipt folder resting next to the empty takeout bags. The gold foil logo of Jason's wealth management firm was stamped across the top of the corporate credit card receipt, poking out of the leather binding. "Jason paid for your dinner," I asked, my voice barely more than a hoarse whisper. My eyes darted between the receipt and my sister's face. Chelsea quickly reached out and flipped the leather folder closed, actively avoiding my gaze. "Jason is just being generous," Chelsea mumbled, taking a quick sip of her wine. "He knows Mom has been stressed lately. He ordered it delivered directly to the house. It is a business expense for him anyway. He has a corporate account for exactly this kind of client relations management." A business expense. The phrase echoed in my head, identical to the exact excuse he used for Courtney's $40,000 diamond necklace. My own husband was funding my family's luxury dinners while simultaneously draining my life savings. "He is not generous," I said, my voice shaking, as the emotional dam finally broke. I took a step toward the table, the tears I had fought back all day finally spilling over my cheeks. "Jason is sleeping with another woman." The dining room went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. I waited for the gasp. I waited for my mother to drop her wine glass in shock. I waited for Chelsea to leap up and wrap her arms around me in sisterly solidarity. "He has been having an affair with a woman from his country club," I continued, my voice gaining volume as I let the horrific truth pour out. "And that is not even the worst part. I went to the bank this morning to get the cashier's check for my restaurant lease. The account was empty. Jason drained it. He stole $180,000 of my bakery savings this morning to fund his mistress's fake business." I took a ragged breath, looking back and forth between them. "I am completely broke. He froze our joint credit cards, so I cannot even buy a hotel room for the night. He locked me out of everything to force me into submission." I stood there, breathing heavily, wiping the tears from my face. I had laid all my cards on the table. My marriage was over. My culinary dreams were shattered, and I had come to my flesh and blood for sanctuary. I expected them to be horrified. I expected absolute, unbridled outrage on my behalf. I fully anticipated my mother pulling me into a fierce embrace, grabbing her phone and cursing Jason's name to the high heavens. I expected Chelsea to tell me that we would figure this out together, that blood was thicker than water, and that no man would ever be allowed to treat a member of our family with such profound and calculating disrespect. I waited for the maternal instinct to kick in, the fierce protective nature that is supposed to shield a daughter when her entire world collapses into ashes. The silence dragged on for what felt like an eternity. The ornate grandfather clock in the hallway ticked methodically, mocking the quiet tension in the room. I looked from my mother to my sister, waiting for the anger to ignite. Instead, my mother calmly picked up her crystal wine glass, swirling the dark red liquid slowly, as if considering a minor inconvenience. "Whitney, please stop being so incredibly dramatic." My mother sighed, taking a delicate sip of her Cabernet. She swallowed, setting the glass down with a soft clink. "Men like Jason, highly successful, high-net-worth men, sometimes have lapses in judgment. It is the cost of doing business at that level of society. You are acting like the sky is falling over a meaningless fling." "A meaningless fling?" I repeated, my voice cracking under the sheer weight of her callousness. "Mom, he drained my entire savings account. He stole $180,000 from me. He froze my access to food and shelter." My mother rolled her eyes, a gesture of profound impatience. "It is joint money, Whitney. Legally, he simply moved assets. And let us be completely honest here. What were you really going to do with that money?" Open another greasy spoon diner and work yourself into an early grave. Jason is securing your future. If you had any sense at all, you would drive back home right now, apologize for crashing his very important meeting, and ask him how you can fix this marriage. I stared at her, feeling a cold numbness spread from my chest down to my fingertips. Apologize to him. You want me to apologize to the man who is laundering his mistress's money with my life savings? I want you to stop being a stubborn fool and look at the bigger picture, Linda snapped, dropping all pretense of maternal warmth. Do you have any idea what Jason does for this family? Do you know how your sister is paying for her master's degree at Columbia? Jason writes the tuition checks. Do you know how I afford the maintenance on this house or that brand new Range Rover sitting in the driveway? Jason handles it. He takes care of us because you certainly cannot do it on a line cook's salary. The room spun. I looked at Chelsea, who was suddenly very interested in separating the meat from her lobster tail. She did not look up. She did not say a single word to defend me. You sold me out. I whispered the devastating truth, locking into place. Both of you. You are taking his money. He bought your loyalty while he was systematically destroying my life. He is family, my mother retorted, her voice rising in defensive anger. He provides real tangible value to our lives. Your little kitchen hobby has never done anything but make you exhausted and bitter. Jason is a prominent wealth manager. He has social standing. He has capital. If you throw away this marriage because of a bruised ego, you will be making the biggest mistake of your life. And mark my words, Whitney, I will not let you drag our reputation down with you. If you walk away from him, you are dead to this family. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. I looked at the expensive silk robe draped over her shoulders, the diamond studs in her ears, the gourmet feast spread across the table. She was completely hollow, a parasite clinging to whoever could fund her delusions of grandeur. She did not care if I was broken, betrayed, or destitute, as long as the direct deposits kept clearing her checking account. Keep the car, Mom, I said, my voice dead and flat. I hope it keeps you warm at night. I turned around, grabbed the handle of my heavy suitcase, and walked out of the formal dining room. The wheels rolled loudly over the marble floor of the foyer. I did not look back. I reached the front door and rested my hand on the brass knob, taking a deep breath to steady my trembling body. Wait, I stopped. It was Chelsea. I heard her footsteps tapping softly against the marble behind me. I turned around, a tiny and foolish spark of hope igniting in my chest. Maybe my younger sister had found her conscience. Maybe she had followed me out here to apologize, to offer her couch for the night, to tell me she had no idea the tuition money came at the cost of my financial ruin. Chelsea stood at the edge of the hallway holding a crystal wine glass. She leaned against the expensive wallpaper, crossing her ankles. She looked at me, and then a slow, malicious smile spread across her face. She laughed, a quiet, breathy chuckle that echoed perfectly in the cavernous foyer. You really are clueless, Whitney, Chelsea said, taking a sip of her wine. I mean, I always knew you were blinded by your little culinary crusade, but I did not think you were this dense. I stared at her, the spark of hope instantly extinguishing into dark ash. What are you talking about? Courtney, Chelsea said smoothly, rolling the name off her tongue like a familiar joke. She is actually quite lovely. We went to a spa day together last month. She has excellent taste in champagne. My grip on the suitcase handle tightened so hard my nails dug into my own skin. You knew. Chelsea rolled her eyes, mirroring our mother's exact expression of superiority. Of course I knew. I have known about Courtney for 6 months. Jason needed someone to cover for him when he took those weekend trips to the Hamptons and Miami. He needed an alibi for his corporate retreats, so he asked me to play along. You covered for his affair. My own sister. Chelsea shrugged carelessly. Do not act so high and mighty. He made it incredibly worth my while. Hush money is highly lucrative if you know how to negotiate. Who do you think paid for my trip to Santorini last summer? Who do you think bought me the vintage designer bag I carried to your anniversary dinner? Jason is generous to people who play by the rules, Whitney. He told me you were cold obsessed with your job and completely neglecting his needs, Honestly, I do not blame him for finding someone who actually knows how to treat a successful man. I felt sick. The betrayal was absolute. It was not just Jason. My entire family was a cartel of leeches happily draining my husband's accounts while keeping me blind to my own humiliation. They had traded my sanity, my marriage, and my future for designer bags and European vacations. You could have had it all if you just played the good wife, Chelsea mocked, stepping closer. Just close your eyes, swipe the platinum card, and let him have his fun. But you had to be independent. You had to have your stupid restaurant. Now look at you, standing in the hallway completely broke, dragging a suitcase like a vagrant. I looked at my younger sister. The silk robe, the perfectly manicured nails, the smug expression of a woman who had never worked a hard day in her entire life. She was a carbon copy of our mother, entirely devoid of a soul, powered only by greed and entitlement. I let go of the suitcase handle. I took 2 steps forward, closing the distance between us until I was inches from her face. Chelsea's smirk faltered slightly, her eyes widening as she read the absolute zero in my expression. Enjoy the tuition checks while they last. Chelsea, I whispered, my voice laced with a lethal and terrifying calm. Because when this is over, Jason is not going to have a single cent to his name. And neither are you. I turned around, grabbed my suitcase, and walked out the front door into the cool night air. I did not slam the door. I pulled it shut with a quiet and definitive click. I walked down the brick pathway toward my car, leaving my blood family behind in their house of cards forever. They had chosen their side. Now I was going to call Harrison. It was time to burn it all to the ground. I sat in the driver's seat of my car with the engine turned off, staring at the darkened street of my mother's neighborhood. The cold air seeped through the windows, but my mind was burning with absolute clarity. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Harrison had left with me. He answered on the first ring. I told him I was ready. He simply gave me an address for a private annex near the downtown federal courthouse and told me to be there at 8 in the morning sharp. I spent the night in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, paying in cash with the tips I had saved in my glove compartment. I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling, mapping out every recipe, every kitchen protocol, and every operational standard I had memorized over the last 7 years. By the time the sun came up, I was no longer a victim. I was a weapon. I arrived at the courthouse annex 10 minutes early. The building was a brutalist structure of concrete and tinted glass, completely separated from the public legal proceedings. A man in a dark suit was waiting for me at the security desk. He did not ask for my name. He simply badged me through the private elevators and escorted me to the penthouse level. The elevator doors opened into a sprawling conference room that smelled of expensive leather and freshly brewed espresso. Harrison was already there, sitting at the head of a massive slate table. He wore a navy suit that looked sharper and more intimidating than the day before. Flanking him were 3 people who radiated predatory intelligence. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in immaculate corporate attire, with open laptops and stacks of densely printed legal documents spread out before them. Harrison gestured to the empty leather chair directly across from him. "Whitney," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Take a seat. Meet my legal counsel. They do not lose and they do not leave loose ends." The woman, whose name was Meredith, slid a sleek silver pen across the table toward me. "We have a very tight window," she stated, her tone brisk and entirely devoid of pleasantries. "Jason has initiated the transfer of your funds into a primary holding shell. If we try to intercept it now through standard family court, he will claim a marital asset dispute and freeze the capital indefinitely. We are not doing that. We are letting him think he won." Meredith pushed a thick stack of papers toward me. "Before we can use you as the inside operative, we have to build a titanium firewall around your personal liability. Jason is leveraging toxic debt to build his Mistress a fake empire. When the federal authorities eventually bring the hammer down, the financial blast radius will be catastrophic. We are severing you from that blast right now." I picked up the pen, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. One of the men, a forensic accountant named Carter, tapped his tablet screen. I have drafted a post-nuptial separation of assets document backdated through a legal loophole we secured regarding Jason's fiduciary malfeasance. It officially severs your financial identity from his. Any loans he takes out today, tomorrow, or next week will rest entirely on his shoulders. Furthermore, Harrison is setting up a blind trust in your name. We are depositing an amount equal to your stolen bakery savings, plus a significant operational consulting fee. Jason cannot touch it, and it gives you the capital you need to secure your restaurant lease once this war is over. I looked up at Harrison. You are giving me my money back before we even start. Harrison leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine. I am paying for an exclusive service, Whitney. I am hiring a mercenary. Consider it a signing bonus. Now sign the paperwork. I did not hesitate. I flipped through the pages and signed my name on every dotted line, legally divorcing my future from Jason's inevitable ruin. Once the final signature was complete, Meredith whisked the documents away into a secure briefcase. Harrison pressed a button on a remote, and the glass wall at the end of the room suddenly transformed into a digital smartboard. An elaborate organizational chart appeared on the screen. At the very top were photos of Jason and Courtney. Courtney has a massive public relations problem, Harrison explained, standing up and pointing to the board. She has promised her high society friends and her initial investors a 5-star dining experience. She rented a 20,000 square foot commercial space downtown. She has the marble countertops and the crystal chandeliers. But she has absolutely zero idea how to actually run a restaurant. She does not know how to source ingredients, structure a menu, or hire a back-of-house staff. If she does not find an executive chef within the next 14 days, the investors will pull out before Jason can finish washing my real estate funds through the business accounts. Carter tapped his screen, bringing up a dummy corporate profile on the smartboard. That is where you come in. We have created a blind limited liability company called Apex Culinary Consulting. It has a flawless, fabricated corporate history complete with outstanding reviews and a top-tier digital portfolio showcasing your exact menu designs. We have stripped your name and any identifying photographs from the materials. To Courtney and Jason, Apex Culinary is an exclusive, high-end consulting firm based out of Chicago. I stared at the board, the brilliance of the strategy washing over me. You want me to apply for the job using the fake agency? Exactly, Meredith said. You will operate entirely as a shadow consultant. You will communicate with Courtney exclusively through secure corporate emails and encrypted phone calls managed by our tech department. Because you are a remote consultant, you will demand full back-end access to their financial servers so you can properly design the kitchen budget and vendor contracts. Once you are inside their network, you download the raw ledger data and send it directly to Carter. I looked at Harrison. I am going to build the exact restaurant they want on paper. I will design the perfect menu format, the perfect kitchen, and give them the exact illusion of success they desperately crave. And while they are celebrating, I will be handing you the digital keys to their prison cell. Harrison finally smiled. It was a cold and calculating expression that promised absolute destruction. Welcome to the team, Whitney. Let us go to work. The moment I left the federal courthouse, the clock started ticking. Harrison provided me with a secure laptop, an encrypted mobile device, and a direct line to Carter and his tech team. I locked myself in my hotel room and immediately opened the laptop. The screen glowed with the sleek, professionally fabricated logo of Apex Culinary Consulting. It was time to build the trap. Creating the portfolio was an exercise in precise psychological manipulation. I knew exactly what Courtney wanted because I knew exactly what kind of woman she was. She did not care about the soul of the food. She cared about the aesthetic, the exclusivity, and the ability to brag to her country club friends about her visionary menu. I did not design a menu for a restaurant. I designed a menu for an image. I pulled high-resolution photographs of dishes I had perfected over my 7-year career. I selected the exact creations Jason used to mock. The truffle-infused Wagyu tartare that took me 3 months to master, while he complained I was spending too much time at work. The gold leaf caviar desserts that required microscopic precision. I stripped all metadata from the images. I removed any trace of my personal brand. I packaged these culinary masterpieces under the anonymous umbrella of Apex Culinary pricing the consulting services at an astronomical premium. People like Courtney and Jason equated expense with value. If I offered them a reasonable rate, they would dismiss the firm. If I demanded a small fortune, they would trip over themselves to hire us. While I assembled this bait, Carter forwarded me intercepted internal communications from Courtney's operation, which she had pretentiously named the Lumiere Hospitality Group. Reading the emails was immensely satisfying. Courtney was in a state of absolute unmitigated panic. The grand opening for her flagship restaurant was approaching rapidly, and her initial investors were demanding a finalized menu and a locked kitchen budget. Courtney had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on imported Italian marble for the bar and crystal chandeliers for the dining room, but she had absolutely no idea how to design a commercial kitchen. She was drowning in vendor inquiries she did not understand and health department compliance forms she could not read. Jason was desperately trying to placate the investors, assuring them that a world-class culinary director was being secured. But his wealth management charisma was failing to mask the fact that they were building a luxury car with no engine. If they did not hire a chef by the end of the week, the primary investors were threatening to pull their capital. If the legitimate investors pulled out, Jason would not be able to mix Harrison's stolen real estate funds into the business without triggering immediate federal audits. The entire money laundering scheme hinged on keeping this restaurant operational on paper. I hit send on the email. The blind portfolio shot through Carter's encrypted servers, routing through a Chicago IP address before landing directly in Courtney's private inbox. I did not have to wait long. Less than 2 hours later, my secure phone buzzed with an incoming email notification. It was Courtney. Her response was dripping with desperate manufactured corporate speak. She praised the Apex Culinary portfolio, calling it exactly the visionary alignment the Lumiere Group was seeking. She practically begged for a voice call to finalize the partnership. I forwarded the request to Carter. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in my hotel room with a specialized headset on. Carter had routed the call through a voice modulation software. When I spoke, my voice dropped a full octave, smoothing out into the crisp, gender-neutral tone of a high-end corporate representative acting on behalf of Apex's anonymous executive chef. I dialed Courtney's number. She answered on the first ring. "This is Morgan with Apex Culinary Consulting," I said, maintaining a cool and detached professionalism. "We received your inquiry regarding the Lumiere Group flagship launch." Courtney's voice flooded my earpiece high and tight with poorly concealed anxiety. "Morgan, yes, thank you so much for calling back so quickly. Your firm's portfolio is stunning. We are looking to move immediately to secure a menu director. We have the capital, and we are ready to sign." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the hotel window at the city skyline. I pictured Jason sitting in his glass tower, completely oblivious to the fact that his mistress was currently begging his wife for salvation. "Our firm operates with extreme discretion," I told her, reading from the script Meredith had approved. "Our executive chef designs the operational framework remotely to ensure absolute objectivity. However, our services come with strict stipulations. We require a $200,000 retainer." I deliberately chose a number slightly higher than the amount Jason had stolen from me. I wanted to bleed them dry using the exact funds they had taken. "That is fine," Courtney said immediately, not even attempting to negotiate. "The money is not an issue." Of course it was not an issue. It was my money she was spending. Secondly, I continued, my voice steady. "In order to properly scale the kitchen operations and design the vendor supply chain, Apex Culinary requires full administrative access to your internal financial servers. We cannot design a profitable menu without completely integrating our software with your back-end budgets and expenditure ledgers. We need to see every contract, every vendor agreement, and every dollar allocated to the restaurant build-out." There was a slight hesitation on the line. I held my breath. This was the critical moment. If Jason had warned her about operational security, she might push back. But Courtney was not a businesswoman. She was a fraud playing dress-up, and she was terrified of looking incompetent to a prestigious Chicago consulting firm. "That makes complete sense," Courtney agreed, her relief palpable. I will have our IT department set up your administrative credentials today. Whatever you need to get the menu finalized for the investors, you have it. Excellent, I replied. We will send the contracts over immediately. We look forward to building this empire with you. I ended the call and disconnected the headset. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the massive, overwhelming surge of adrenaline. I had just walked right through their front door. I had handed them the rope, and they had eagerly wrapped it around their own necks. My encrypted phone buzzed. It was a message from Harrison. The contracts had been electronically signed by Courtney and countersigned by Jason as her chief financial officer. The retainer fee was already being wired into the blind trust. I opened my secure laptop. An email from the Lumiere group sat in my inbox containing the master passwords to their entire back-end financial server. The Trojan horse was officially inside the city walls. I cracked my knuckles, pulled up the first encrypted ledger, and went to work. The interface of the Lumiere Hospitality Group financial server loaded on my screen with a clinical white and gold aesthetic. It was exactly the kind of pretentious digital storefront Courtney would demand, prioritizing visual appeal over actual functionality. But beneath that glossy surface lay the raw, unfiltered data of Jason's entire money laundering operation. I adjusted the screen brightness, ignoring the fatigue burning behind my eyes, and began the systematic dismantling of my husband's fake empire. My first move was establishing absolute dominance over the communication channel. Operating under the pseudonym Morgan Y, drafted a rigid non-disclosure agreement and sent it to Courtney's inbox. The email explicitly stated that Apex Culinary Consulting required total confidentiality and would only communicate via secure email to protect our proprietary operational strategies. I outlined that any deviation from this protocol, including unsolicited phone calls, would result in the immediate termination of our partnership. Courtney signed and returned the NDA within 12 minutes. She was terrified of losing her star chef, and incredibly eager to comply with whatever rules made her feel like she was running a high-stakes corporate enterprise. With the communication boundaries locked in place, I turned my attention to the task they had actually hired me to do. I had to build a fully functional, mathematically flawless kitchen budget. If I delivered anything less than perfection, Jason would use it as an excuse to scrutinize my firm. I spent the next 6 hours doing what I did best. I designed a spectacular menu framework, mapped out the square footage needed for prep stations, and built a comprehensive inventory list. I priced out commercial ovens, ventilation hoods, and refrigeration units down to the absolute penny. I created an operational masterpiece that would dazzle their investors. But building the kitchen was just the cover story. My real objective was the vendor contracts. Because I possessed 7 years of intense hands-on experience in commercial kitchen management, I knew exactly what equipment should cost and which suppliers were legitimate. When I opened Courtney's expense ledgers, the discrepancies were not just obvious to me, they were glaringly aggressive. I found an invoice for a commercial-grade dishwashing array listed at $85,000. I knew for an absolute fact that the specific model topped out at $22,000. The supplier listed on the invoice was a generic logistics company based in Delaware, not a certified restaurant equipment manufacturer. I scrolled further down the ledger and found monthly maintenance fees for HVAC systems that had not even been installed yet. There were recurring payments of $50,000 labeled as premium ingredient sourcing retainers paid to shell companies that possessed no agricultural or distribution footprint. Jason was not even trying to be subtle. He was inflating the restaurant's operational costs by hundreds of thousands of dollars using fabricated invoices to wash Harrison's stolen real estate capital through the hospitality group's accounts. To a standard auditor, these might look like the bloated expenses of an incompetent first-time restaurant owner. But to an executive chef, it was a glowing neon sign pointing directly to federal wire fraud. I highlighted every single fraudulent invoice, isolated the offshore routing numbers, and bundled the files into an encrypted folder. I opened my secure connection to Carter Harrison's lead forensic accountant and initiated the transfer. The progress bar crept across my screen, silently shifting the evidence from Jason's hidden vault directly into the hands of the man preparing to destroy him. Within seconds of the transfer completing, a message popped up on my secure chat interface from Carter. The message was brief but electrified with victory. "We have the routing packets. You just handed us the entire offshore map. Keep digging." I dove deeper into the server, bypassing the surface-level expenses and digging into the structural financing of the restaurant. That was when I encountered my first piece of resistance. I attempted to open a subfolder labeled Investor Bridge Loans, and a red dialog box appeared demanding a secondary administrative clearance. 2 minutes later, an email arrived in my Apex Culinary inbox. It was from Jason, operating under his official title as Chief Financial Officer for the Lumiere Group. Morgan Jason wrote, his tone dripping with the same corporate condescension he used on me in his office. "I noticed your credential attempting to access our bridge loan documentation. While we appreciate Apex's thorough approach to menu design, our macro-financial structuring is strictly compartmentalized. Please restrict your analysis to kitchen operational overhead. I handle the real business here." I read the email twice, feeling a cold smile stretch across my face. He had used the exact same phrase on me. "I handle the real business." He was trying to put a barrier between me and the very documents that would send him to prison. I cracked my knuckles and began typing my response, channeling every ounce of cold, calculating authority I had learned from Harrison's legal team. "Jason," I replied, mimicking his corporate jargon flawlessly, "Apex Culinary cannot guarantee the 30% profit margins promised to your investors without auditing the total debt service layered onto the restaurant's operational requirements. If your bridge loans require aggressive monthly servicing, we must inflate the menu pricing models to compensate, which directly impacts our culinary strategy. If you cannot provide total financial transparency, we must withdraw from this project and inform the primary investors that the operational budget is fundamentally compromised." I hit send and waited. I knew exactly how Jason's mind worked. He was a narcissist who thrived on control, but he was also completely beholden to the investors. If Apex walked away and cited financial opacity as the reason, the investors would demand a full audit. Jason could not risk an audit. 4 agonizingly long minutes passed. The silence in my hotel room was absolute. Then a new email chimed in my inbox. Morgan Jason responded, his capitulation evident in the short, clipped sentences. "Administrative access has been granted to the requested folders. Please proceed with the menu formatting." I clicked back over to the server. The red lock icon on the bridge loan folder had vanished. Jason had just handed over the keys to his own execution. I opened the folder, revealing dozens of heavily leveraged financial documents. I did not bother reading them. I simply highlighted the entire directory, compressed the files, and dragged them into the secure transfer portal to Carter. The data rushed through the encrypted tunnel, a silent and devastating flood of evidence. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the laptop illuminating the dark hotel room. Jason thought he had locked me out of my life, but he had just given me unlimited access to his ruin. The infiltration was a complete success. Now it was time to see exactly how much collateral damage he was willing to cause. The progress bar on the secure transfer portal vanished, replaced by a simple green checkmark confirming the delivery. I sat back in my hotel room chair, rubbing my tired eyes. The digital silence of the room felt heavy. I had just handed over the central nervous system of Jason's entire operation. Now it was up to Harrison's team of forensic accountants to dissect the carcass. Less than 20 minutes later, my encrypted phone vibrated against the desk. It was a video conference request from Carter. I accepted the call and his face appeared on my laptop screen. He was sitting in the same brutalist conference room at the federal courthouse annex, but his tie was loosened and his eyes were wide with a mixture of professional awe and utter disgust. "We decrypted the bridge loan folders," Carter said, wasting no time on pleasantries. "Harrison is reviewing the hard copies right now." "Whitney, your husband is not just a thief, he is a financial psychopath." I leaned closer to the screen. "What did you find?" Carter shared his screen, bringing up a complex web of financial flowcharts and scanned legal documents. "I told you that laundering Harrison's real estate capital requires time and clean seed money," Carter explained, his cursor highlighting a series of red boxes on the chart. But Courtney is impatient. She has been signing vendor contracts and demanding luxury materials at a pace that outstrips their ability to wash the stolen funds safely. Jason needed massive amounts of short-term, liquid cash to keep her happy and keep the investors from looking too closely at the books. To get that cash, he took out high-interest commercial bridge loans. I frowned, scanning the numbers. Those loans require collateral. What did he use to secure them? He could not use our house because my name is on the deed, and he locked me out of the accounts. Exactly, Carter said, clicking open a PDF document. He needed clean collateral from someone who trusted him implicitly. Someone who would sign whatever he put in front of them without reading the fine print. The document loaded on my screen. It was a commercial lien agreement. My eyes went straight to the property address listed under the collateral section. It was a gated community address. It was my mother's house. My breath hitched. I leaned forward, staring at the digital signature at the bottom of the page. It was Linda's signature, signed cleanly next to Jason's stamp as her official wealth manager. He leveraged my mother's house, I whispered, the reality crashing over me. He did not just leverage it, Carter corrected grimly. He bled it dry. Jason convinced your mother to sign a blanket power of attorney for her investment portfolio, likely under the guise of maximizing her retirement returns. He then used that authority to take out a maximum equity line of credit against her property. He transferred that equity directly into Courtney's hospitality group to pay for the Italian marble countertops and crystal chandeliers. If these bridge loans default, the bank will seize your mother's home immediately. I sat frozen in my chair. My mind flashed back to the previous night. I pictured my mother sitting in her formal dining room, wearing her silk robe, sipping expensive wine, and telling me to apologize to the man who was currently stealing the roof over her head. She had defended him. She had chosen him over her own flesh and blood because she thought he was her golden ticket. She had no idea he was actually her executioner. Carter cleared his throat, bringing up a second set of documents. It gets worse. He did not stop with your mother. Look at these personal loan guarantees. I looked at the new set of papers. They were high-interest, unsecured private loans. The primary guarantor was Jason, but the CO signer listed on every single document was Chelsea. Chelsea's student debt, Carter explained. Jason told her he was paying for her master's degree at Columbia. In reality, he used his status as her financial advisor to open massive private loan accounts in her name. He paid her tuition with a fraction of it to keep her quiet, and then funneled the rest of the borrowed capital straight into Courtney's business. Chelsea is legally on the hook for nearly $400,000 in toxic debt. When this house of cards collapses, her credit will be permanently destroyed, and her wages will be garnished for the rest of her natural life. I stared at the screen in absolute silence. The sheer scale of the collateral damage was breathtaking. Jason was actively dragging my entire toxic family into his financial grave just to impress his mistress. He had bought their loyalty with their own money. He had given my mother a luxury car and paid for my sister's Santorini vacations using funds he had stolen directly from their futures. They traded my sanity for designer bags, I thought, and he bought those bags by mortgaging their souls. Whitney, Carter said softly, his voice breaking through my internal monologue. I know they are your family. If you want us to try and untangle them from this mess, we might be able to negotiate a plea deal for Jason that requires him to assume the debt. But it will complicate our timeline. It will give him leverage. I looked at the documents on the screen. I saw my mother's signature. I saw my sister's name. I remembered standing in that grand foyer begging them for sanctuary only to be laughed at. I remembered Chelsea's malicious smirk as she admitted she took hush money to cover for the man who was sleeping with another woman. They had told me I was dead to the family because I cared more about my kitchen hobby than playing the obedient wife. They had actively chosen the parasite. I reached out and adjusted the angle of my laptop screen, looking directly into Carter's eyes. I felt absolutely nothing for them. The lingering threads of daughterly obligation and sisterly love had been completely severed the moment I walked out of their front door. They were strangers to me now, Do not change the timeline. I said, my voice as cold and hard as polished steel. Do not untangle them. Do not offer Jason any plea deals or leverage. Carter raised an eyebrow. You are certain. They will lose everything. The bank will foreclose on the house and your sister will be bankrupted. I am absolutely certain, I replied without a single ounce of hesitation. My mother bragged about the value Jason brought to our family. She told me to look at the bigger picture. She told me to stop being a stubborn fool. So let her look at the bigger picture. Let them both experience the true cost of doing business with a man like Jason. Carter nodded slowly, a deep respect settling into his features. Understood. We proceed as planned. We let them burn. He ended the call and the screen faded to black. I sat in the quiet hotel room, my resolve hardening into something indestructible. Jason thought he was surrounded by allies. He thought he had built a fortress of loyal supporters who would defend him to the bitter end. He did not realize his fortress was made of dry kindling, and I was the one holding the match. My family had tied themselves securely to the mast of a sinking ship. Now all I had to do was watch them drown. My secure laptop went to sleep, plunging the hotel room into darkness. Just as I closed my eyes, my cell phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen illuminated my face. It was a text message from Jason. Whitney, I need you to come by the house tomorrow at noon. The message read, my accountant flagged a minor issue with our joint tax returns. I have the amendment paperwork printed out. Come sign it so we can put this behind us. Do not make this difficult. I stared at the glowing text. Jason was a wealth manager handling 8-figure portfolios. He did not make careless mistakes on his own personal tax returns. He certainly did not need an immediate signature on a Wednesday, unless he was desperate. I took a screenshot of the message and sent it through the encrypted portal to Meredith Harrison's lead attorney. 10 minutes later, my secure phone rang. Do not sign a single piece of paper that man puts in front of you, Meredith commanded the moment I answered. Her voice was sharp and devoid of amusement. I just ran a background check on the property deeds attached to your marital home. Jason is attempting a rapid liquidation. I sat up straight in bed, the exhaustion vanishing instantly. What does that mean? He cannot sell the house without my consent. My name is on the deed. Exactly, Meredith replied, which is why he is not handing you a tax amendment. He is going to hand you a quitclaim deed disguised in a stack of financial jargon. He is experiencing a massive liquidity crisis because of the bridge loans he took out for Courtney's restaurant. The interest payments are due, and he needs cash immediately to keep the shell companies afloat. He wants to trick you into signing away your equity rights to the house so he can leverage it. A cold laugh escaped my throat. He was trying to render me homeless just to keep his mistress in crystal chandeliers. The sheer arrogance was staggering. He genuinely believed I was foolish enough to blindly sign legal documents just because he used an authoritative tone. I will tell him I am busy and ignore the text I said, preparing to delete Jason's message. Wait, Meredith interrupted, her strategic mind working rapidly. If you refuse to show up, he will know you are consulting legal counsel. He expects you to be a terrified, submissive wife who has been locked out of her bank accounts for days. He expects you to be hungry and desperate for normalcy. If you do not show up, he will panic and move his assets deeper underground. I looked at the darkened hotel room. Meredith was right. Jason was a predator. If I showed strength, he would bolt. I needed to play the exact role he had scripted for me. More importantly, I realized this was the perfect opportunity. I needed physical access to his personal laptop to clone his local hard drive for Carter, and his laptop was always sitting on his home office desk. I will go. I told Meredith, a new plan forming with clarity. I will play the broken housewife who just wants her marriage back. I will cry. I will beg. I will let him feel like a god. Just make sure Carter has that cloning drive ready for me by tomorrow morning. It will be delivered to your hotel lobby by dawn, Meredith assured me. Be careful, Whitney. Jason is cornered, and cornered men are unpredictable. The next morning, I stood in front of the hotel bathroom mirror and completely deconstructed my appearance. I washed the makeup off my face, leaving the dark circles under my eyes prominent. I pulled my hair back into a messy knot. I put on a faded gray sweater and a pair of old jeans. I looked exactly like a woman who had spent the last several days crying in a cheap motel, eating out of vending machines, and mourning the death of her marriage. I looked completely defeated. I drove to my house in the suburbs, parking my car in the driveway just before noon. The familiar sight of the manicured lawn and the painted front door made my stomach churn. It was a beautiful house built on a foundation of absolute lies. I walked up the pathway, took a deep breath to summon the tears, and unlocked the front door. Jason was sitting at the massive marble kitchen island. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking relaxed and completely in control. A thick stack of legal documents rested on the counter in front of him, right next to a silver pen. His personal laptop, the target I desperately needed, was sitting open on the far side of the island. He looked up when I walked in. His eyes scanned my unkempt hair, my pale face, and my slumped shoulders. I saw a flash of profound satisfaction cross his features. He loved seeing me broken. It validated his entire worldview. "You look terrible, Whitney," Jason said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "I told you that you would not last a week out there on your own. You should have just stayed in your lane." I forced a tremor into my voice, letting a single tear slip down my cheek. "I have no money, Jason. My cards are declined everywhere. I had to sleep in my car for 2 nights. Please, I just want this to stop. I want my life back." Jason smiled. It was the benevolent smile of a dictator offering a crumb of bread to a starving peasant. He stood up and patted the marble counter next to the stack of papers. "I told you I handle the real business," Jason said smoothly, "and I am willing to forgive your little outburst at my office. I know you were just emotional and confused. If you want your life back, if you want access to your checking account so you can buy groceries, all you have to do is trust me." He tapped the silver pen against the documents. "Sign these tax amendments. It clears up a minor liability issue. Once you sign, I will unfreeze your debit card and we can discuss how to move forward with our marriage." I walked slowly toward the kitchen island, keeping my head bowed in total submission. I reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the silver pen. I looked at the documents. The top page was a standard tax form, but I could see the thick staple binding a dozen dense legal pages beneath it. The quitclaim deed was buried right there in the middle, waiting for my signature to destroy my financial future. "Okay," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "I will sign it." "But Jason, I feel so dizzy. I have not eaten anything real in days and my head is pounding. Could you please get me a glass of ice water and some aspirin from the master bathroom upstairs before I read this?" Jason sighed heavily, clearly annoyed by the delay, but entirely unsuspicious. He turned his back to me and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps echoing up the hardwood stairs. The moment he was out of sight, I dropped the pen. My tears vanished instantly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the specialized flash drive Carter had given me. I had less than 60 seconds before he returned. I jammed the sleek metal flash drive into the USB port of Jason's laptop. Carter had assured me it was entirely automated and designed to bypass standard passwords using a preloaded script. The screen flickered for a fraction of a second before a small, black terminal window appeared. Lines of green text began scrolling at a dizzying speed, copying folders, mirrored drives, and cached emails directly onto the physical device. Above me, I could hear the heavy thud of Jason's footsteps crossing the master bedroom floor. He was directly over the kitchen. I tracked his movements by the creak of the floorboards. He walked toward the ensuite bathroom. The faint sound of water running echoed through the quiet house. I glued my eyes to the laptop screen. A progress bar materialized at the bottom of the black window. 10%, 20%. My heart slammed violently against my rib cage. If he walked down those stairs right now, the entire operation would detonate. He would see the drive. He would know I had spoken to someone with high-level technological resources. The element of surprise, our greatest weapon against his arrogance, would evaporate instantly. 35%. The water stopped running upstairs. A cabinet door opened and closed. He was getting the aspirin. I leaned my weight against the cool marble of the kitchen island, fighting the urge to yank the drive out prematurely. I needed everything. I needed the hidden correspondence with his offshore bankers. I needed the unencrypted drafts of his fraudulent loan applications. I needed the digital footprint of his affair with Courtney to completely void Harrison's prenuptial agreement. 50%. Jason's footsteps moved away from the bathroom and back into the master bedroom. He was taking his time. To him, I was a defeated woman who had spent 2 days sleeping in a car. He felt no urgency because he believed he held absolute power. His arrogance was buying me the exact seconds I needed to seal his fate. 75%. He stepped out of this bedroom and onto the top landing of the hardwood staircase. I could hear the ice clinking against the glass in his hand. The progress bar crawled. 85%. 90%. Jason started down the stairs. Each step sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. 95%. Come on, I whispered under my breath, my fingers hovering millimeters from the metal drive. 100%. The black terminal window vanished, leaving the laptop screen looking exactly as it had before I touched it. A tiny green light on the edge of the flash drive pulsed twice, signaling a safe extraction. I ripped the drive from the port and shoved it deep into the pocket of my jeans, stepping quickly away from the island. I wrapped my arms around my stomach and hunched my shoulders, snapping my posture back into the shape of a broken and desperate wife. Jason rounded the corner into the kitchen just as my hand left my pocket. He held a crystal tumbler filled with ice water and a small white pill resting in his palm. He did not even glance at the laptop. His eyes went straight to my hunched form, and a smug, satisfied smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Here you go," Jason said, his tone dripping with fake benevolence. "Drink the whole glass. You are probably severely dehydrated. This is what happens when you try to act tough without any actual resources, Whitney. You just end up hurting yourself." I took the glass with a shaking hand, playing my part to perfection. I popped the aspirin into my mouth and swallowed a large gulp of the freezing water. I kept my gaze fixed firmly on the floor tiles. "Thank you," I murmured, letting my voice waver. Jason stepped closer, invading my personal space. He reached out and patted my shoulder, a gesture that made my skin crawl. "Do not thank me. Just sign the tax papers so we can get your life back on track. I will call the bank right now and authorize a temporary unfreezing of your debit card so you can get a hot meal and a decent hotel room for the night. Tomorrow we can talk about how you are going to adjust your attitude moving forward." I looked at the stack of documents resting on the marble counter. The quitclaim deed was hiding right there beneath the surface, waiting to strip away my ownership of the house. I reached out and rested my hand flat against the top page. I closed my eyes and let out a soft, pained groan. I swayed slightly on my feet, leaning heavily against the counter for support. "What is wrong now?" Jason asked, a hint of genuine irritation piercing his calm facade. "My head," I whimpered, raising my free hand to press against my temple. "The lights in here are so bright. The migraine is completely blinding me, Jason. I cannot even focus my eyes to read the top line of the page. The letters are just swimming around. Just sign the bottom line," he insisted, pushing the silver pen closer to my hand. "You do not need to read it. I already handled the details. It is just a standard amendment." I picked up the entire stack of documents and pulled them to my chest, clutching them tightly. "I cannot sign legal papers when I am this dizzy," I said, forcing a pathetic sob into the back of my throat. "I am so sorry, Jason. I just need to lie down in a dark room. Let me take these with me. I will go to the hotel, sleep for a few hours until the pounding stops, and read them over tonight. I will bring them back to your office fully signed first thing tomorrow morning." Jason glared at me. His jaw tightened, and he reached out as if to snatch the papers back. But then he stopped. He looked at my messy hair, my pale face, and my slumped posture. In his mind, I was utterly defeated. I was homeless, broke, and begging for a debit card. He genuinely believed I posed zero threat. "Fine," Jason snapped, clearly disgusted by my display of weakness. "Take them, but do not waste my time tomorrow. Have them signed and on my assistant's desk by 9 in the morning, or I will leave your accounts frozen permanently. I am done playing games with you." I nodded meekly, gripping the papers tighter. "I understand. Thank you, Jason." I turned around and walked toward the front door. I kept my steps slow and shuffling. I did not look back. I opened the door, stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, and walked down the driveway to my car. I climbed into the driver's seat, tossed the fraudulent documents onto the passenger side, and locked the doors. The moment I was safely enclosed inside the vehicle, the pathetic, broken housewife vanished. I sat up perfectly straight. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small metal flash drive. It felt heavier than it looked. It held the digital equivalent of a nuclear bomb. I started the engine, a slow and triumphant smile finally breaking across my face. Jason wanted me to bring the papers to his office tomorrow morning. Instead, I was going to hand this drive directly to a billionaire who was actively planning his funeral. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from my marital home for the last time. I navigated the afternoon traffic with a singular, razor-sharp focus. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but the adrenaline that had fueled me through the encounter with Jason was slowly transforming into a cold, sustained energy. I drove straight back to the downtown federal courthouse annex. The security guard recognized me this time and badged me through without a word. Carter was waiting in the penthouse conference room. He had a bank of monitors set up across the slate table. I walked in, pulled the metal flash drive from my pocket, and set it down in front of him. I did not say a word. I did not need to. Carter grabbed the drive, plugged it into a specialized decryption terminal, and went to work. The transfer took less than 4 minutes. I watched the screens as Jason's entire digital life spilled out in organized directories. Hidden offshore accounts, unencrypted emails, fabricated invoices, and the heavily leveraged bridge loan agreements. "You got it," Carter said, his eyes scanning the data streams with rapid precision. "You got absolutely everything. He is totally exposed. I am forwarding this package to Harrison right now." The counterstrike began immediately. Harrison did not just observe the data. He weaponized it. He was a ghost in the commercial real estate sector, wielding immense power without ever leaving a fingerprint. Armed with the exact loan account numbers and the identities of the lending institutions Jason had used, Harrison initiated a synchronized financial attack. He utilized his corporate leverage to anonymously tip off the risk management departments of those specific banks. He provided them with breadcrumbs pointing to severe irregularities in the Lumiere Group's collateral structure. In the ruthless world of high finance banks, do not wait for a conviction to protect their capital. The moment a billionaire's network hints that a mid-level wealth manager is wildly overleveraged and using fraudulent collateral, the automated risk algorithms take over. The banks panicked. They triggered the emergency covenant clauses buried deep in Jason's loan agreements. They began calling in the bridge loans early, demanding immediate repayment to secure their positions. By Thursday morning, the financial vice was tightening with brutal efficiency. Sitting in my hotel room monitoring the Apex Culinary email server, I had a front-row seat to the absolute carnage. The internal communications of the Lumiere Group turned into an active war zone. At 9 in the morning, Courtney sent a frantic email to Jason and her project managers. She demanded to know why the imported Italian marble suppliers had halted their shipments at the port. By 11, the general contractor for the restaurant build-out emailed the entire executive team, threatening to pull his construction crew off the site because his weekly wire transfer had bounced. Through my anonymous consultant email, I received a message from Courtney that was dripping with manufactured panic. "Morgan," she wrote to my alter ego, "we are experiencing a slight liquidity hiccup with our primary investors. Can we slash the commercial oven budget by 40% and redirect those funds to the dining room lighting fixtures?" I replied within minutes, maintaining my icy corporate persona. Apex Culinary cannot compromise the integrity of the kitchen infrastructure. If the operational budget is not fully funded by close of business Friday, we will be forced to terminate our consulting contract and notify the investors of your insolvency. The pressure was breaking them. Jason tried to maintain control, sending a company-wide memo citing a temporary banking glitch, but the terror in his private emails to Courtney was undeniable. I read a desperate message he sent her at noon. The banks had frozen his credit lines solid. His liquidity was evaporating in real time, and he had no way to access the offshore accounts without triggering a federal audit. The illusion of his wealth was crumbling. I was reviewing a particularly unhinged email from Courtney to a crystal chandelier distributor when my personal cell phone rang. It was Chelsea. She had never called me during the middle of the workday unless she needed money or a favor. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the moment before I finally pressed answer. Whitney. What is goings on with Jason? Chelsea demanded. There was no greeting. There was no asking how I was doing after being locked out of my own home. There was just pure, selfish panic. I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Chelsea, I replied, keeping my voice light and entirely detached. My tuition check bounced, she shrieked, the sound grating against my ear. I went to the registrar's office to clear my account for the semester, and they told me the check from Jason's corporate account was returned for insufficient funds. They are threatening to drop my enrollment if I do not pay the balance by tomorrow afternoon. I tried calling his cell. I tried calling his office, but everything goes straight to voicemail. That sounds like a terrible inconvenience, I said, leaning back in my chair and watching the chaos unfold on my laptop screen. An inconvenience. Whitney, this is my master's degree. If I do not get this money, I am going to be kicked out of the program. You need to go to his office right now and find out what is happening. You need to fix this. She still thought I was the obedient, pathetic scapegoat. She still thought she could order me around while living lavishly off the man who had destroyed my life. She knew he was sleeping with Courtney. She knew he was hiding assets. And yet she had the sheer audacity to demand I fix her bouncing checks so she could continue her luxury lifestyle uninterrupted. I cannot do that, Chelsea, I said softly, my voice dripping with the exact same condescension she had used on me at the family dinner. Jason told me I need to let him handle the real business. He is securing our financial future. I am just a chef with a kitchen hobby. Stop being petty, Chelsea screamed through the phone. I need that money. You have to call him. I smiled, looking at the frozen accounts and the collapsing fake empire on my monitor. Try walking to class, I said. I hung up the phone and permanently blocked her number. I tossed my phone onto the hotel desk and turned my attention back to the encrypted laptop screen. The financial squeeze Harrison had orchestrated was doing exactly what we intended. It was separating the predators from the parasites. Chelsea was panicking because her free ride was over. Jason was scrambling to move numbers on a spreadsheet that no longer responded to his commands. But Courtney was a completely different breed of delusional. Instead of recognizing that the walls were closing in, Courtney decided to double down on the illusion. Less than 2 hours after I blocked my sister from my phone, an urgent company-wide email from the Lumiere Group flooded my Apex Culinary inbox. The subject line was typed in all capital letters, Grand Opening Gala. I read Courtney's strategy and marveled at the sheer hubris. She was bleeding cash, her contractors were threatening to walk, and her credit lines were frozen solid. Instead of halting operations, she decided to throw a massive high-society gala on Saturday night. The email detailed an extravagant red carpet event designed explicitly to appease her nervous investors. She promised a night of unparalleled luxury, a showcase of the operational perfection of the restaurant to reassure them their capital was completely safe. It was a classic confidence scam. She was trying to blind them with champagne and caviar so they would not look at the rotting foundation of the business. A second email arrived directed specifically to Morgan. Courtney demanded that Apex Culinary finalize the tasting menu for 500 VIP guests. She wanted truffles, Wagyu beef, and an excessive display of wealth to prove to the city that the Lumiere Group was unstoppable. I placed my hands on the keyboard and typed my response. I assured Courtney the culinary execution would be absolutely flawless. I promised a menu that would leave her investors completely speechless. It was the easiest promise I had ever made, because the food was going to be perfect. I would not give Jason the satisfaction of blaming the failure of the restaurant on a botched kitchen service. I wanted them to have the best meal of their lives right before we destroyed them. My secure phone buzzed. It was Carter. He told me to come to the federal courthouse annex immediately. When I arrived at the penthouse conference room, the atmosphere had shifted from analytical preparation to the quiet tension of an impending strike. Harrison stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city skyline. He turned around as I entered. In his hand he held a thick and heavy envelope made of premium black cardstock. He walked over and tossed the envelope onto the slate conference table. It landed with a soft and expensive thud. "Courtney sent this to my office this morning," Harrison said, his voice a low and dangerous rumble. "It is a VIP invitation to her grand opening gala." I picked up the envelope and slid the invitation out. The gold foil lettering gleamed under the conference room lights. It formally invited Harrison to celebrate the launch of the Lumiere Group. The sheer audacity of the gesture made my blood run cold. She was using his stolen commercial real estate money to build a fraudulent empire, and she had the absolute nerve to invite him to the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She expects me to show up, play the supportive billionaire husband, and lend my reputation to her little venture. Harrison explained, his eyes locking onto mine. She thinks my physical presence at the gala will signal to the other investors that the business is financially backed by my empire. It is a desperate play to secure more capital. "Are you going to go?" I asked, dropping the invitation back onto the table. Harrison stepped closer, a predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. "We are both going to go, Whitney. The legal team has finished compiling the wire fraud evidence from the data you cloned. The federal injunctions are ready. We are timing the asset freeze to hit exactly as the gala begins. When Jason and Courtney are standing on that stage trying to convince the elite of this city to hand over more money, we are going to walk through the front doors and tear their entire world to shreds." I felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful it made my fingertips tingle. I had spent days operating in the shadows, hiding behind encrypted emails and fake corporate personas. I was ready to step into the light. I was ready to look Jason in the eye when the trap finally snapped shut. Meredith, the lead attorney, walked into the room carrying a pristine white garment box tied with a black silk ribbon. She set it gently on the table next to the invitation. "If we are going to crash a high society gala and publicly execute a wealth manager," Harrison said, gesturing to the box, "we need you looking like the executioner. Open it." I reached out and pulled the black silk ribbon. I lifted the lid and folded back the crisp layers of tissue paper. Resting inside was a gown that stole the breath right out of my lungs. It was an emerald green designer masterpiece cut from heavy and luxurious silk. It had a sharp architectural neckline and a daring slit that screamed absolute power. It was not just a dress. It was a $10,000 suit of armor. It was the kind of garment designed for a woman who owned the room the second she walked into it. I ran my hand over the cool silk. In my 7 years of marriage to Jason, he had never bought me anything this beautiful. He had always preferred me in practical clothes, smelling like flour and cooking oil, keeping me firmly positioned as the humble and hardworking wife while he wore the expensive suits. He wanted me invisible. Harrison had bought me a gown designed to make me unforgettable. "You are going to walk into that ballroom on my arm," Harrison said softly, reading the expression on my face. "You are going to look like a queen, and Jason is going to realize in real time that he traded a diamond for a piece of glass." I looked up from the emerald silk, my heart pounding with a fierce and unbreakable resolve. The broken housewife who had cried on the kitchen floor was dead. The woman standing in this conference room was ready for war. I closed the box and looked Harrison squarely in the eye. "Tell your team to finalize the injunctions," I said, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "We have a party to crash." Saturday morning arrived with a heavy downpour that washed the city streets clean. I was awake long before dawn. I left my hotel room at 4 a.m, dressed in a standard-issue chef uniform. I wore baggy black trousers, a double-breasted white jacket with absolutely no name embroidered on the chest, and a black skullcap pulled low over my forehead. I added a black surgical mask, a common enough sight in commercial kitchens, to obscure the lower half of my face. Today, I was just a nameless expediter sent by the consulting firm to oversee the grand opening. I arrived at the loading docks of the hospitality group's flagship restaurant just as the wholesale delivery trucks were backing into the alley. I swiped my temporary vendor keycard and walked through the heavy steel doors. The moment my boots hit the non-slip rubber matting of the commercial kitchen, the familiar rush of adrenaline surged through my veins. Courtney had spent a fortune out front on crystal and velvet, but Jason had authorized millions for the back of house. The kitchen was massive, gleaming with brand new stainless steel top-of-the-line convection ovens and custom refrigeration units. It was a culinary fortress built entirely on stolen money. The kitchen brigade was already assembling. 50 line cooks, prep chefs, and sous chefs stood around looking nervous and exhausted. They had been hired at the last minute by Courtney's desperate management team and had zero direction. I stepped to the front of the stainless steel prep island, clapped my hands twice, and took absolute command of the room. "I am the lead expediter for your consulting firm," I announced, projecting my voice over the hum of the industrial ventilation hoods. "We are serving a 5-course tasting menu to 500 VIP guests tonight. I do not care what chaos is happening in the dining room. In this kitchen, we operate with absolute perfection. Find your stations." For the next 12 hours, I operated like a machine. I moved from station to station, tasting, correcting, and demanding flawless execution. I watched my meticulously designed menu come to life exactly as I had envisioned it. The Wagyu beef was trimmed and portioned with microscopic precision. The lobster bisque was strained until it was like liquid silk. The gold leaf garnishes were staged in climate-controlled lockers waiting for the final plating. I refused to give Jason or Courtney a single excuse. If the food was late, if a steak was overcooked, or if the caviar service was clumsy, Jason would spin the narrative. He would stand in front of his wealthy investors and blame the collapse of his business on a botched culinary operation. He would point his finger at the kitchen staff and claim the restaurant failed because he hired the wrong consulting firm. I was completely neutralizing that defense. The food leaving these swinging doors tonight was going to be the absolute pinnacle of fine dining. When the federal agents froze their accounts, the investors would know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the failure was pure, unadulterated financial fraud. At 3 in the afternoon, the heavy double doors connecting the kitchen to the dining room swung open. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned my back instantly, grabbing a chef knife and aggressively chopping a bundle of fresh parsley on a cutting board. Courtney marched into the kitchen. She was wearing a tailored white pantsuit and holding a clipboard like it was a prop in a high school play. Her voice, shrill and grating, echoed over the clattering pots and pans. "Who is in charge here?" Courtney demanded, tapping her designer heels against the rubber mats. "The ice buckets in the VIP lounge are silver. I specifically requested brushed nickel. This is a disaster. You people need to fix it right now." I kept my head down, my knife moving in a rapid, rhythmic blur. I did not turn around. I did not speak. A brave sous chef stepped forward, stammering an apology and promising to swap out the buckets immediately. Courtney rolled her eyes, muttered something highly insulting about incompetent hourly workers, and marched back out through the swinging doors. She had been less than 10 feet away from me. She had no idea the woman holding the chef knife was the same woman whose life savings she had used to buy her pantsuit. I let out a long, slow breath and went back to work. By 6 in the evening, the kitchen was a perfectly tuned engine. The prep was entirely complete. The stations were stocked, sanitized, and ready for service. The front-of-house staff was lighting the table candles out in the dining room. The red carpet outside was being rolled out for the paparazzi. I gathered the kitchen staff around the central island for one final briefing. I looked at the exhausted but proud faces of the cooks who had followed my lead all day. "The menu is locked," I told them, my voice steady and firm. "The prep is flawless. You know exactly what to do from here. Execute the service exactly as we practiced. Do not let anything distract you." I untied my apron and tossed it onto the stainless steel counter. I pulled the black skull cap off my head and let my hair fall loose. The lead sous chef looked at me with confusion. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Service starts in 30 minutes. "My consulting contract ends right now," I replied, turning toward the back exit. "The kitchen is yours." I pushed through the heavy steel delivery doors and stepped out into the damp, cool air of the alleyway. The roar of the city traffic washed over me. A sleek black town car was idling by the dumpsters, its engine purring quietly. The rear door swung open as I approached. I climbed into the plush leather seat and closed the door, leaving the chaotic noise of the restaurant behind. The driver smoothly pulled out of the alley, navigating through the downtown traffic toward my hotel. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. I had built them a flawless kitchen. I had delivered the perfect illusion of success. The culinary trap was fully armed and ready to spring. Now I just needed to wash the smell of exhaust out of my hair, put on $10,000 worth of emerald green silk, and go burn my husband's world to the ground. I walked into my hotel room and immediately stripped off the uniform that smelled of searing meat and commercial sanitizer. I stepped into a scalding hot shower, letting the water wash away the physical exhaustion of the past 12 hours. When I stepped out, the room was completely silent. I walked over to the closet where the white garment box waited. I carefully lifted the emerald green silk gown and slipped it on. The heavy fabric cascaded down my body, fitting with absolute perfection. I pulled my hair back into a sleek and severe style, applying makeup that highlighted the sharp angles of my face. I looked in the mirror and did not recognize the woman staring back. The subservient wife who had baked bread and begged for basic respect was gone forever. I grabbed my clutch and headed downstairs where Harrison's driver was waiting to take me to the courthouse annex for the final briefing. When the private elevator doors opened into the penthouse conference room, the atmosphere was electric. The quiet, methodical hum of the previous days had been replaced by the frantic, highly coordinated energy of a military command center. Carter stood in front of his massive digital smartboard, flanked by 4 other forensic accountants, who were typing furiously on their laptops. The board was completely illuminated with red lines connecting offshore bank accounts to domestic limited liability companies. Meredith paced the length of the slate table, a Bluetooth earpiece secured in her ear, barking rapid-fire instructions in sharp legal jargon. Harrison stood at the far end of the room, impeccably dressed in a tailored black tuxedo. He held a crystal glass of bourbon, watching the digital web of his wife's betrayal with a cold and absolute calm. He turned his head as I walked in. His dark eyes swept over the emerald gown, and a slow nod of approval confirmed I looked exactly like the weapon we needed. "We have the final sequence," Carter announced, his voice slicing through the chatter of the room. He tapped his tablet, and the center of the smartboard magnified a specific cluster of data points. The cloned hard drive from Jason's personal laptop was the exact Rosetta Stone we needed. He did not just keep financial ledgers on that local drive. He kept his private encrypted text logs. Carter pressed a button and a series of text messages flashed across the screen in stark high definition. They were messages between Jason and Courtney dated just 3 weeks ago. In them, Courtney explicitly complained about the slow movement of the stolen real estate capital. Jason responded by clearly outlining his strategy to illegally leverage my mother's home equity and my sister's student loans to bridge the gap. Courtney replied with a single laughing emoji and told him to hurry up before her investors got suspicious. "It is the holy grail of corporate prosecution," Meredith stated, stepping up to the table and dropping a massive, freshly printed dossier onto the slate surface. "We needed to prove intent, and those text messages provide undeniable, irrefutable proof of conscious collusion." Courtney cannot play the ignorant housewife. She actively pushed Jason to commit wire fraud to fund her vanity project. She knew the money was stolen. "Furthermore, we have mapped every single cent of your $180,000. We can trace its exact path from your business savings through the primary holding shell and directly into the vendor contracts for the restaurant's commercial ovens." Carter and his team have successfully linked the embezzlement of Harrison's corporate funds, the grand larceny of your marital assets, and the fraudulent loans taken out against your family's properties into one cohesive, unbreakable federal case. Harrison set his bourbon glass down on the table. The sharp clink of the crystal silenced the remaining chatter in the room. "Are the filings prepared?" Harrison asked, his voice a low and dangerous rumble. Meredith nodded sharply. "The entire dossier was submitted to our contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation exactly 14 minutes ago," she confirmed. "The White Collar Crimes Division has already fast-tracked the review based on the magnitude of the stolen real estate capital. But we are not waiting for federal agents to build their timeline. We are executing the civil strike right now." Meredith tapped a command on her laptop. "We have officially filed emergency ex parte injunctions in both federal and state courts. The judges reviewed the evidence of imminent capital flight and signed the orders 10 minutes ago." I looked at the digital clock glowing in the corner of the conference room. It was exactly 7 in the evening. At this very second across the city, the red carpet was being unrolled outside the Lumiere Group's flagship restaurant. Valets were opening the doors of luxury town cars. Photographers were snapping pictures of the city's wealthy elite as they stepped into the glittering venue. Jason and Courtney were likely standing in the grand foyer sipping vintage champagne, completely oblivious to the legal guillotine positioned directly above their necks. "The injunctions are live," Carter said, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he monitored the global banking networks. "The freeze orders have been electronically served to every domestic and international financial institution tied to Jason Courtney and their entire network of shell companies. It is a comprehensive worldwide asset freeze. Every single credit card in their wallets is now dead plastic. Their personal checking accounts are locked. The restaurant's operating accounts are suspended. They cannot move a single dollar, they cannot liquidate a single asset, and they cannot hire a criminal defense attorney using stolen funds. They are financially paralyzed." Harrison adjusted his silk bow tie and stepped away from the window. The trap was set. The doors were locked. The only thing left to do was watch them realize they were trapped inside a burning building. He walked toward me, offering his arm with a dark, predatory grace. "Are you ready to go to a party, Whitney?" I stepped forward and looped my arm through his, the emerald silk of my gown rustling softly against his tuxedo. "Let us not keep my husband waiting." The drive to the venue was silent, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. We pulled up a block away, concealed behind Blacktown cars. Harrison's private security team was in position, blending into the crowd of event staff. From our vantage point in the darkened back seat, we had a perfect view of the red carpet rolling out in front of the Lumiere Group flagship property. Flashbulbs strobed against the damp evening air as local socialites made their grand entrances. Then a familiar white luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. The valet opened the rear doors, and my mother Linda stepped out, followed closely by my sister Chelsea. They were draped in designer fabrics, their faces plastered with practiced haughty smiles. They moved down the red carpet like minor royalty, soaking up the attention of the lifestyle bloggers covering the event. A reporter stepped into their path, asking about their connection to the restaurant launch. I rolled down the tinted window a fraction to hear the audio feed Harrison's security team had tapped into. "Oh, we are immediate family," Linda boasted, her voice carrying loudly over the crowd. "The chief financial officer, Jason, is my son-in-law. He is an absolute financial genius. He funded my daughter's graduate studies and handles all our private portfolios. We are incredibly proud of the luxury empire he is building tonight." Chelsea leaned into the microphone, flashing her whitened teeth. "Jason takes immaculate care of us. He knows how to treat his family. He always says you have to spend real capital to make a real impact, and looking at this gorgeous venue, he clearly spared no expense." I closed the window. They were broadcasting their complicity to the local media, publicly tying their social identity to a man who had stolen my life savings to buy their loyalty. They were walking into the slaughterhouse and happily locking the doors behind themselves. Through the security feeds on Harrison's tablet, we watched the 500 VIP guests, mingling beneath the imported crystal chandeliers. The Italian marble bar was packed with investors, sipping expensive champagne, completely unaware the liquor was purchased with illicit bridge loans. Jason and Courtney stood near the center of the room, playing the ultimate power couple. Courtney wore a glittering silver gown, clinging to Jason's arm and laughing loudly at the investors to project the image of a seasoned hospitality executive. Jason worked the room with the slick, predatory charm of a man who believed he had successfully outsmarted the world. At 8 in the evening, the lights dimmed. A single spotlight illuminated a raised stage at the far end of the ballroom. The low murmur of the crowd quieted as Jason confidently climbed the steps and took his place behind the lucite podium. He tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through the massive dining room. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Jason began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the grand opening of the Lumiere Group. When we first conceived this project, people told us that creating a 5-star culinary experience in this market was an impossible dream. They said the overhead was too high and the vision too ambitious." He paused, letting the crowd chuckle appreciatively. But those people do not understand the power of bold financial strategy, and they certainly do not understand the sheer creative force of my brilliant partner, Courtney. He gestured toward the front row, where Courtney beamed under the spotlight. Jason wove a masterful web of corporate buzzwords and fabricated success metrics. He bragged about the state-of-the-art kitchen infrastructure that I had literally built for him 12 hours prior. He painted a picture of a hospitality empire destined to dominate the region. He was selling a ghost ship, and the investors were eagerly buying the tickets. Harrison pocketed his tablet and looked at me. It is time. We stepped out of this town car and walked toward the entrance. We bypassed the red carpet, entirely moving with deliberate purpose toward the heavy mahogany double doors that sealed off the main ballroom. Two ushers reached out to ask for our invitations, but one look at Harrison's icy, unyielding expression made them step back in silent terror. Inside the ballroom, Jason was reaching the climax of his toast. He lifted a crystal flute of champagne high into the air. "So please raise your glasses," Jason instructed the room, his smile wide and victorious. "To Courtney, to the Lumiere Group, and to a future built on absolute excellence." I placed my hand firmly on the brass handle of the right door. Harrison gripped the left. We pushed. The heavy mahogany doors swung open with a loud, resounding crash that violently shattered the polite applause of the ballroom. The sound echoed off the marble floors like a gunshot. Every single head in the room snapped toward the entrance. The string quartet playing softly in the corner abruptly stopped the sudden silence falling over the massive crowd like a suffocating blanket. I stepped over the threshold, my arm looped tightly through Harrison's. The brilliant, glaring light of the chandeliers hit the emerald silk of my gown. We did not hesitate. We began walking straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, parting the sea of wealthy investors with our sheer presence. On the stage, Jason froze. His arm was still raised in the air, the champagne flute trembling in his grip. The smug, victorious smile melted off his face, replaced instantly by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw the exact moment his reality fractured. He looked at the emerald gown, the perfect makeup, and the absolute lack of submission in my posture. Then his gaze shifted to the man holding my arm. In the front row, Courtney dropped her glass. It shattered against the marble floor, the sharp sound ringing loudly in the dead quiet room. All the blood drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She stared at her billionaire husband, her entire fake empire crumbling under the weight of his cold, predatory glare. To our right, near the bar, Linda and Chelsea stood paralyzed. My mother's mouth opened in a silent gasp, her eyes darting frantically between Jason, me, and the heavily armed security personnel fanning out along the perimeter of the room. Chelsea clutched her designer bag to her chest, the color vanishing from her cheeks. They finally realized I had not come to apologize. We reached the edge of the stage. The 500 VIP guests watched in breathless, stunned silence. The air in the room was thick with impending disaster. Jason lowered his arms slowly, his chest heaving with shallow breaths. "Whitney," he stammered into the live microphone, his smooth corporate voice cracking in panic. "What are you doing here?" I released Harrison's arm and took one step forward, looking directly up at the man who had stolen my life. I did not raise my voice, but in the absolute quiet of the ballroom, my words carried clearly to every single investor in the room. "I am here to handle the real business, Jason." Jason stared at me as if a ghost had just materialized in the center of the ballroom. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The microphone slipped from his trembling hand and hit the stage floor with a deafening thud. A sharp whine of feedback pierced the air, causing the wealthy investors in the front row to wince and cover their ears. Courtney stumbled backward, her silver heels catching on the hem of her gown. She grasped the edge of the velvet stage curtain for balance, her face completely drained of color. She looked like a woman who had just realized she was standing on a trapdoor. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy with the suffocating weight of an impending disaster. Then a sharp and furious voice broke the tension. "Whitney, what do you think you are doing?" I turned my head to see my mother Linda shoving her way through a cluster of shocked investors near the bar. Her face was flushed with indignation. She marched toward the center aisle, raising a perfectly manicured finger to point directly at my face. You are making a massive scene. You are embarrassing this family in front of the entire city. Get out of here right now before you ruin your husband's big night. She tried to rush forward to grab my arm, fully intending to drag me out of the venue like a disobedient child. But she never made it. Two men from Harrison's private security detail, both built like solid walls of muscle in dark suits, stepped seamlessly into her path. They did not touch her. They simply folded their arms and stared down at her with blank, intimidating expressions. Linda slammed on the brakes, her eyes widening in outrage as she realized she was completely powerless. Chelsea stood a few feet behind her, clutching her designer handbag, her mouth hanging open in sheer terror. Harrison did not even look at my mother. He let go of my arm and walked with a slow, predatory calm up the short flight of stairs to the stage. He bypassed Jason, completely bending down to retrieve the dropped microphone from the floor. He tapped it twice to ensure it was working. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Harrison said, his deep voice rolling over the massive crowd. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Harrison. I am Courtney's husband." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The investors began whispering frantically to one another. Courtney let out a small, pathetic whimper, shrinking back against the curtain. I wanted to take a moment to publicly congratulate my wife on this incredibly ambitious venture. Harrison continued pacing slowly across the stage. "It takes a staggering amount of capital to build a room this beautiful. The crystal chandeliers, the imported Italian marble, the premium velvet drapery. It is a masterpiece of modern hospitality. But as a businessman, I firmly believe that investors deserve absolute financial transparency. You deserve to know exactly what kind of foundation your money is resting on." Harrison pulled his sleek black smartphone from his tuxedo pocket. He tapped a single button on the screen. Behind him, the massive digital projector that had been displaying the glowing gold logo of the Lumiere Group suddenly flickered. The logo vanished. In its place, a high-definition financial spreadsheet illuminated the entire stage. The document was covered in bright red highlights, circling offshore bank routing numbers, shell company registrations, and wire transfer logs. "What you are looking at is the true financial architecture of this restaurant," Harrison announced to the room. That initial deposit of $180,000, the clean seed money that opened these corporate accounts, did not come from a venture capital firm. It was stolen directly from the personal business savings of the brilliant woman standing right there. Harrison pointed directly at me. Every head in the ballroom turned to stare at the emerald green gown. And the rest of the capital, Harrison continued, his voice dropping into a lethal register. "The millions of dollars used to secure the vendor contracts and the property lease that was siphoned directly from my commercial real estate holdings through fraudulent shell companies managed by your chief financial officer, Jason. He has been systematically embezzling my funds to build his Mistress a fake empire." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Investors began shouting. Men in expensive suits pulled out their phones, frantically dialing their personal bankers. Jason looked like he was going to vomit. He looked wildly around the room, searching for an exit, but Harrison's security guards had already locked down the main doors. It was my turn. I lifted the hem of my silk gown and walked up the stairs to the stage. I did not look at Jason. I walked straight over to Courtney, who was shaking so violently she could barely stand. "You spent the last 2 weeks begging a Chicago firm named Apex Culinary Consulting to save your launch," I said, making sure my voice carried clearly over the panic in the room. "You begged them to design your menu, to structure your kitchen, and to hide your total lack of hospitality experience from the people in this room. You paid a $200,000 retainer for a shadow consultant to make you look like a visionary." Courtney stared at me, her eyes brimming with terrified tears. I shook my head, feeling nothing but cold pity for the woman who had mocked my life's work. "I am Morgan," I stated clearly. "I am the lead consultant of Apex Culinary. I built your entire kitchen this morning while you were getting your hair blown out." Courtney covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a choked sob as the reality of the trap finally closed around her. I turned my back on her and faced the crowd of investors. They fell silent again, desperate for information about their capital. As the culinary director with full administrative access to their back-end servers, I am exercising my fiduciary duty to inform you that this restaurant is already mathematically bankrupt, I announced, delivering the final fatal blow. Jason took out massive high-interest commercial bridge loans to pay for the marble you are standing on. He inflated vendor invoices by hundreds of thousands of dollars to wash stolen money. The operational budget is completely compromised. The credit lines have been frozen by the lending institutions. If you wrote a check to the Lumiere Group tonight, it is already gone. I looked at Jason, who was now leaning against the lucite podium, his face buried in his hands. He was entirely destroyed. His reputation, his career, and his freedom were gone. He had thought I was just a kitchen hobbyist he could discard without consequence. Now I was the one holding the match while his entire world burned to the ground. Harrison stepped forward, taking the microphone from my hand. His presence alone commanded the room to quiet down, though the frantic whispers of ruined investors still buzzed like an angry hive. He looked out over the sea of pale faces and delivered the final strike. If any of you are hoping to salvage your capital through civil litigation, you are already too late, Harrison announced, his voice devoid of any sympathy. My legal team submitted the cloned server data and the encrypted offshore routing logs directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation exactly 1 hour ago. The White Collar Crimes Division has already executed emergency injunctions. Every single bank account tied to Jason Courtney, and the Lumiere Group has been frozen by federal authorities. You cannot withdraw your funds because those funds are currently seized as evidence in a massive federal racketeering and wire fraud investigation. The ballroom erupted. It was not just panic. It was pure, unadulterated outrage. Several men in the front row surged toward the stage, their faces red with fury, demanding answers from Jason. Harrison's security detail immediately stepped up, forming a human barricade at the edge of the stage to keep the mob at bay. Jason shrank back, terrified of the very people he had spent months manipulating. Whitney. A shrill voice pierced through the cacophony of the ballroom. I looked down to see my mother, Linda, pushing her way to the front of the crowd. She had bypassed the investors and was standing right below the stage, her face twisted into a mask of absolute venom. She pointed a shaking finger at me, completely ignoring the federal crimes that had just been exposed. "You vindictive, jealous little brat," Linda screamed, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "You could not stand to see Jason succeeding. You could not stand that your sister and I were finally getting the life we deserved. You orchestrated this entire circus just to humiliate him because he found a woman who actually knows how to treat a successful man. You have ruined him. You have ruined this family." I looked down at the woman who had birthed me. There was no anger left in my heart. There was no sadness. There was only a profound and chilling emptiness. I walked down the short flight of stairs leading off the stage, stepping directly into her path. Harrison's security guards parted slightly to let me through, but kept a close watch. I reached into the hidden pocket of my emerald gown and pulled out the folded legal documents Carter had printed for me that morning. I held them out. "I did not ruin him, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm amid the screaming investors. "He ruined himself, and he took you down with him." Linda snatched the papers from my hand, her eyes darting over the pages. "What is this nonsense?" she spat. "That is a commercial lien agreement," I explained, watching the color slowly begin to drain from her cheeks. Jason needed clean collateral to secure the high-interest bridge loans he used to buy those crystal chandeliers hanging over your head. He used the blanket power of attorney you signed to take out a maximum equity line of credit against your house in the gated community. Those bridge loans defaulted today. The bank owns your home now, Mom. They are executing the foreclosure, and they are taking the house on Monday morning." Linda stopped breathing. The papers trembled in her manicured hands. She looked from the lien agreement up to Jason, who was cowering on the stage, unable to meet her eyes. "No." Linda gasped, her voice suddenly small and frail. "He said he was maximizing my retirement portfolio. He bought me the Range Rover. He bought the car with the money he stole from the equity of your home," I stated, delivering the cold, hard facts. "You have absolutely nothing left." "Wait, what about my tuition?" a panicked voice cried out. Chelsea pushed past our mother, her eyes wide with terror. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "Whitney, what about my loans?" "He said he paid for my master's degree. He said it was covered." I gently but firmly detached her fingers from my arm. "Jason never paid for your degree, Chelsea. He used his position as your financial advisor to take out massive unsecured private loans in your name. He used a fraction of that borrowed money to pay your tuition and funneled the remaining hundreds of thousands of dollars directly into Courtney's fake restaurant business." Chelsea staggered backward as if I had physically struck her. She clutched her head, her designer handbag dropping to the floor. "No, no, that cannot be real. I cannot pay that back. My credit will be destroyed." "You are legally liable for nearly $400,000 in toxic debt," I told my younger sister, feeling no pity for the woman who had laughed at my pain just 48 hours ago. "Your wages will be garnished for the rest of your life. Enjoy the hush money he paid you to cover up his affair. I hope that vintage designer bag was worth your entire financial future." Chelsea collapsed onto her knees right there on the imported Italian marble, sobbing hysterically as the reality of her total bankruptcy crushed her. Linda dropped the foreclosure notice, falling to her knees beside her golden child, both of them weeping in the ruins of the luxury they had valued above my life. From the street outside the venue, a new sound cut through the chaos of the ballroom. It started as a faint wail in the distance and rapidly grew into a deafening chorus. Sirens, dozens of them screaming down the city blocks and converging directly on the Lumiere Group's flagship property. The flashing red and blue lights began to reflect off the glass doors of the grand foyer. The sound snapped Jason out of his paralyzed state of shock. Survival instinct finally kicked in. He looked at the front doors, saw the approaching police cruisers, and made a desperate, cowardly choice. He turned around, shoved Courtney violently out of his way, and sprinted toward the kitchen service doors at the back of the stage. "He is making a run for the loading dock," I shouted to Harrison. Harrison did not even blink. He gave a sharp nod to the head of his security detail. Before Jason could even reach the swinging kitchen doors, two massive security operatives vaulted onto the stage. They moved with terrifying speed. One guard tackled Jason around the waist, bringing him crashing down hard onto the polished wood floor. The second guard pinned Jason's arms behind his back, pressing his face firmly against the stage. Jason thrashed and screamed, demanding they let him go, spewing threats about lawsuits and assault, but the guards held him effortlessly. Courtney hit the floor hard when Jason shoved her. She sat there in her ruined silver gown, weeping uncontrollably as she watched her lover being pinned to the ground like a common criminal. The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom burst open, and a swarm of federal agents in tactical windbreakers flooded into the room, their badges gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. The lead federal agent marched directly onto the stage, flashing his badge before reciting Jason his rights. Jason wept openly as the cold steel handcuffs clicked around his wrists, begging anyone who would listen to call his lawyers. But his lawyers were nowhere to be found, knowing their retainer checks were about to bounce. As Jason was hauled out of the ballroom through a sea of flashing cameras and furious investors, Meredith calmly walked over to Courtney. While Courtney was still sitting on the marble floor in her ruined silver gown, Meredith handed her a thick legal envelope. It contained Harrison's immediate filing for divorce, citing the fraud clause that stripped her of every single marital asset. The grand opening of the Lumiere Group had ended before a single appetizer was served. 6 months later, the dust had finally settled, leaving a landscape of absolute justice in its wake. Jason pleaded guilty to multiple counts of federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. Without the financial resources to hire high-powered defense attorneys, he was assigned a public defender who quickly advised him to take a plea deal. He is currently serving a 12-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. His wealth management career is permanently destroyed, his license revoked, and his name completely disgraced. Courtney tried to fight the prenuptial agreement in family court, but the mountain of digital evidence proving her active participation in the money laundering scheme made it a lost cause. The judge upheld the fraud clause without hesitation. She was evicted from her penthouse, stripped of her designer assets, and left completely destitute. The high society friends she had desperately tried to impress abandoned her, instantly treating her like a contagious disease. My blood family fared no better. The bank foreclosed on my mother's house that exact Monday morning, just as I promised. Without Jason's stolen capital to prop up their illusions, Linda and Chelsea were forced into total bankruptcy. They now share a cramped, run-down two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, working minimum-wage retail jobs just to keep the lights on. Chelsea's wages are heavily garnished to pay back the fraudulent private student loans Jason took out in her name. They sent me dozens of desperate letters and voicemails begging for forgiveness, claiming they were manipulated, and asking for financial help. I never answered a single one. I simply marked them as returned to sender and went back to work. I stood in the center of a gleaming state-of-the-art commercial kitchen. It was not a fake set piece built on stolen money. It was mine. Every stainless steel prep station, every convection oven, and every cast iron skillet belonged to me. My flagship restaurant, appropriately named The Crucible, was fully operational and completely booked for the next 3 months. I had recovered my entire $180,000 savings returned to me with significant interest from the blind trust Harrison had established. I used my own clean capital to secure the lease and design the space exactly the way I had always dreamed. I hired a dedicated, passionate staff who respected my leadership. The air in the kitchen smelled of roasted garlic, fresh herbs, and searing Wagyu beef. It was the smell of hard work, independence, and absolute victory. I wiped my hands on my pristine white chef's apron and walked through the swinging doors into the main dining room. The space was alive with the hum of satisfied guests clinking wine glasses and warm ambient lighting. At the exclusive chef's table, positioned perfectly to oversee the kitchen operations, sat Harrison. He was no longer wearing the intimidating bespoke armor of a man preparing for corporate warfare. He wore a crisp white button-down shirt, looking relaxed, genuinely happy, and incredibly handsome. Our alliance, forged in the fires of mutual betrayal, had evolved over the past 6 months into a profound partnership. He had provided the legitimate logistical backing and corporate real estate leverage to help me secure the prime location for my restaurant, treating me not as a charity case, but as a brilliant equal. I walked over to his table carrying 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of vintage champagne. I set the glasses down and poured the bubbling liquid, sliding one across the polished wood toward him. "The reviews from the food critics came in this morning," I said, taking a seat beside him. "They called the menu a masterclass in resilience and flavor. We are officially the highest-rated new restaurant in the city." Harrison picked up his glass, a warm and genuine smile transforming his usually stoic features. "I never doubted you for a single second, Whitney. I knew exactly what kind of fire you had inside you the moment I walked onto your front porch. You built an empire, and you did it entirely on your own terms." I looked around the beautiful, thriving restaurant. I thought about the broken woman who had cried in a bank lobby 6 months ago, believing her life was over. Jason had tried to bury me. My family had tried to use me as a stepping stone. They thought they had buried a victim, but they did not realize they had planted a seed. I raised my glass, meeting Harrison's dark, intelligent eyes. We held each other's gaze, acknowledging the silent, unbreakable bond we had forged. It was a partnership built on absolute trust, mutual respect, and the shared knowledge that we had completely rewritten our own destinies. "To handling the real business," I said softly. Harrison clinked his glass against mine, the crystal ringing with a clear and perfect sound. "To the real business," he echoed. I took a sip of the champagne. It tasted like freedom. It tasted like absolute, unparalleled victory.